Your commission is terminated. The court has no further need of your services. Collect your things and be gone by nightfall. That is all.
Isagi stood frozen in an ornate hallway of Remulus Castle. The words hit him before he could brace for them. You are no longer the royal alchemist, effective immediately. He stared at the man delivering the news, his mind refusing to catch up. What? He went straight to Gallius, the head of the National Alchemy Department, and demanded an explanation. Gallius accused him of laziness, claiming Isagi spent all his time playing with soil instead of creating magical tools for the army. Isagi pushed back. He was not playing with soil. He was using alchemy to improve crop quality, developing resilient varieties that could survive extreme conditions. The work mattered. Gallius scoffed. He declared that invading another country and taking their food was far more effective than growing it. The Remulus Empire was a militaristic nation that poured its wealth into army expansion while its own citizens went hungry. Isagi stood there, the reality settling in. His efforts to solve food shortages through alchemy had meant nothing to the people in charge. Elsewhere in the castle, a confident young man stood in a laboratory surrounded by bubbling potions, reporting completed tasks to an armored figure. A dark-haired man smirked nearby, commenting that the subject was nothing more than a weapon. Isagi swallowed his frustration. He had always known alchemists were treated like tools by those in power, but hearing it so plainly still stung. In his years of service, he had poured himself into research that nobody valued. He had held up tomatoes and tested soil and refined seeds, chasing a future where crops could feed the hungry. None of it had earned him anything but a dismissal. Myrthia's reaction was anything but calm. She went from shock to outrage in seconds. This is unacceptable. She had seen firsthand how hard Isagi worked, how much he had contributed, and none of it mattered to the people above them. Isagi stayed composed and told her not to worry about it. Despite everything, he said he was grateful that at least she recognized his efforts. That was enough for him. Isagi thought quietly about his situation. He was an orphan with no family to fall back on, and he felt genuinely grateful that Myrthia cared enough to stand up for him. Having her by his side made the sting of being fired a little easier to bear. Myrthia, her face flushed with concern, asked him what he planned to do next. He admitted he had no idea. He considered going back to the orphanage where he grew up. They would probably take him in, but he was not sure he could make a living there. Myrthia's expression shifted to something more determined. She suggested he come visit her hometown instead. Isagi was caught off guard by the offer. She quickly clarified, blushing, that she was just presenting an option since her village genuinely needed someone with his skills. She explained that her home was in the Beast Kingdom, a large nation where most of the population were beastmen, and her small village sat near the border. Isagi asked honestly whether he would even be useful there. Someone else chimed in with excitement, insisting that everyone would be thrilled to have a talented alchemist like him. That caught Isagi off guard, and for a moment, he did not know what to say. He thought back to a promise he and Myrthia had made. They had once discussed creating crop solutions for difficult soil types. He remembered Myrthia tending to livestock with a worried look on her face, talking about how food shortages kept getting worse back home, despite the area's natural resources. Isagi made up his mind. He told her he would fulfill that promise. The agricultural solution they had been working on just needed a small adjustment based on their recent results, and he could implement it in her village. His face was set with determination as he said he was heading to Myrthia's village. He added that introducing improved crops there could have a real impact beyond just one village, and the excitement in his voice was obvious. Myrthia's eyes lit up with hope, and she thanked him for thinking of others before himself. But then, Isagi hesitated and asked if it was truly all right for him to go through with this. Myrthia pulled back slightly, admitting she had gotten carried away with excitement. She pointed out that any nation would probably welcome an alchemist who could improve their harvests. With that settled, Myrthia cheerfully announced she was going to resign from her position and start packing. Isagi stared at her in disbelief. He told her she did not have to throw away a prestigious job just for this. But Myrthia insisted. She wanted to be by his side for what came next. Isagi stood there, puzzled by how far she was willing to go, as the view behind them opened up to the vast castle they were about to leave behind for good. Before they could leave, there was the matter of packing. Isagi asked if Myrthia needed anything else, then pulled out a magical backpack that could carry far more than its size suggested, thanks to alchemy. Murthia was impressed by how much it could hold. Their journey stretched across weeks. They passed through towns and met people along the way. Some nights, they camped under the stars, sharing a fire and growing closer as travel companions. By the time they were riding through vast open landscapes, over a month had passed since they left the castle. When they finally arrived at Primeia village in the Beast Kingdom, Murthia had to wake Isagi up. He stepped out and immediately noticed the variety of beastmen around him, surprised by how different they all looked. Murthia smiled and told him to visit her home first, before meeting the village chief. Isagi felt uneasy about being a human in a beastman village, but Murthia's calm confidence put him at ease. Then, she dropped a surprise on him. She mentioned casually that the village chief was actually her father. Isagi froze. He suddenly felt far more nervous about his position as an alchemist looking for a place to stay. Murthia waved off his concern, insisting that if anyone questioned his role, she would set them straight. They entered Murthia's house and were greeted warmly by her mother, Sienna. She pulled Murthia into a tight hug the moment she saw her, much to Murthia's embarrassment. Isagi introduced himself as an alchemist from the Remulus Empire and said he was eager to speak with the chief about how he could contribute. But when he came face to face with Kelsey, Murthia's father and village chief, the mood shifted fast. Kelsey glared at him, clearly furious. He had already assumed Isagi was there to marry his daughter. "I won't hand my daughter over to some stranger." Isagi tried to introduce himself, but Kelsey was not hearing it. Murthia jumped in quickly, her face red, and explained that Isagi was there as the village alchemist, not as a suitor. Once the misunderstanding was cleared up, Kelsey's entire demeanor changed. He reintroduced himself properly and listened as Isagi explained his desire to improve the community through alchemy. The tension melted away, and for the first time since arriving, Isagi felt like he might actually belong here. The group sat in silence after his introduction, and Isagi was not sure what to make of it. He asked why everyone had gone so quiet. Murthia explained that alchemists were extremely rare in this part of the world, so it made sense that her parents had never encountered one. Kelsey admitted he did not really know what alchemy was. Isagi tried to explain, but the blank looks told him words were not going to cut it. Murthia suggested he simply show them instead. Isagi asked to borrow Kelsey's sword. Kelsey handed it over, and Isagi examined it carefully. He told Kelsey that the blade contained no monatite at all. Kelsey was stunned. He had paid 20 silver coins for it, believing it was genuine. Isagi explained that the material was actually a cheap imitation that only resembled monatite. But rather than leave it at that, he offered to transform it into the real thing. He placed his hands on the sword and began the process. Glowing alchemical circles appeared around him as magical energy swirled through the blade. He analyzed its shape and weight first, then channeled his magic to restructure the material entirely. When it was done, he held up the completed sword. It was now a genuine manatite weapon. Kelsey took it back to test, channeling his energy into a strike aimed at a wooden target. The result was far more powerful than anyone expected. The sword tore clean through the target and kept going, piercing straight through the wall of the meeting hall. Everyone stared in shock. Sienna immediately scolded Kelsey for being so reckless. Isagi stepped in and reassured them that the damage could be fixed with alchemy. He repaired the wall on the spot, then took the chance to explain what he really wanted to do. His goal was not making weapons. He wanted to apply alchemy to agriculture and help the village grow better crops. Murthia beamed at him, calling him amazing and thanking him for everything he had shown them. With the demonstration over, the conversation turned to the real problem. Kelsey told Isagi plainly that the village's soil was poor and getting worse. Yields from the surrounding forests and mountains were declining too, and he saw little hope for agriculture. Isagi listened, then responded with confidence. He told Kelsey that this was exactly why he was here. He intended to use alchemy to improve the soil and grow crops that could survive even in harsh conditions. Murthia had told him about the village's situation long ago, and it was the reason he had come. He thought back to a moment when he had first spoken about this dream. He had told someone that he wanted to save people from hunger using alchemy. That conviction had stayed with him ever since, and standing here now, it felt more real than ever. Murthia stepped forward and urged Kelsey to give Isagi a chance. Her voice was firm, and her expression left no room for doubt. She stressed how much the village needed what alchemy could offer, and made it clear she believed in Isagi's ability to deliver. Kelsey considered it. The idea of using alchemy for farming sounded far-fetched, but he had just seen what Isagi could do with a sword and a broken wall. He agreed to let Isagi try. Murthia's relief was immediate. She thanked her father with visible emotion, and he told told her to show Isagi around the village. She agreed without hesitation, turning to Isagi with a bright expression and telling him she would guide him. The tension that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by something warmer. She was ready to support him fully, and it showed. As they stepped outside, Isagi took a quiet moment to reflect. He had left the palace behind, left behind a system that never valued what he could do. But here, in this small village at the edge of the Beast Kingdom, he finally had the freedom to pursue what he believed in. He looked out at the village stretched before him and felt something settle inside him. This was where he would start over, and this time, he would do things his way. Isagi told Murthia that he wanted to make this village prosperous through alchemy. The two of them walked along a path surrounded by greenery and mountains, the peaceful countryside stretching out around them. Murthia pointed out where his house would be, and Isagi felt a surge of hope. He told himself that from now on, his new life was starting, but that feeling faded the moment he saw the place. The land around the house was barren, scattered with rocks, and the house itself was a wreck. The roof was damaged, the walls had holes, and the whole structure looked like it might collapse. Murthia stood beside him, holding a paper, staring at the building in silence. Isagi could barely get the words out. This was supposed to be his new house. Murthia looked over the property, clutching various items she had brought along, unsure what to even do with them. Before Isagi could say anything, her expression sharpened. She declared the situation unacceptable and said she was going straight to her father to complain. Her protective instincts kicked in immediately, and she was not about to let Isagi live in a place like this. But Isagi stopped her. He was not upset. In fact, he looked almost excited. He told her that he actually wanted to try building his own ideal house from scratch. That was the kind of thing an alchemist should be able to do. He thought back to his time in the Empire, where being an orphan had meant constant discrimination and terrible living conditions. Here, he finally had the chance to create something on his own terms. Murthia paused, then accepted his decision. If Isagi was set on it, she would follow his lead. She agreed to let him handle it his way, trusting his judgment completely. Isagi examined the old building and concluded it was too far gone to salvage. The wood was too deteriorated for recycling, so he decided to use alchemy to transform it instead. His hands began to glow with magical energy, and the house started coming apart in a cloud of dust. He focused his power, and the entire structure collapsed into a pile of wood. Murthia watched the whole thing with wide eyes, clearly impressed by what alchemy could do. She offered to help clear the wooden planks, though she seemed concerned about how heavy they were. Isagi thanked her, but she lifted them with ease, her beastkin strength making quick work of it. With the debris out of the way, Isagi pulled a modified herbicide from his magic bag. He explained it would clear the overgrown weeds instantly. The effect was immediate. The weeds withered and died on contact, leaving the ground bare and ready. Next came the real work. Isagi took out Treant wood from his bag, lumber he had harvested from plant-type monsters. It was a durable material, perfect for building. He and Murthia reviewed the construction plans together. Then he got started. He used alchemy to enhance the wood's durability, and a glowing spell circle spread out beneath him as the magic took hold. He lifted the treated lumber into place using levitation magic, organizing the beams effortlessly. Murthia watched as the frame of a new house began to take shape before her eyes. The groundwork was set, beams locked into position, and what had been an empty lot just moments ago now had the skeleton of a real home standing on it. The whole process was a display of what alchemy could accomplish when put to practical use. Murthia helped where she could and observed the rest, and together they pushed forward with the kind of quiet teamwork that had carried them all the way from the Empire to this village. Isagi told himself he did not need anyone's help for this part. He had the blueprint in his head, and all he had to do was execute it. He crouched down, channeled his alchemy, and got to work. The walls went up, the roof took shape, and before long he was standing in front of a beautifully crafted house with a vibrant roof. He looked at it with pride. It was finished. He stepped back to take it all in. Murthia stood beside him, and her reaction said everything. She told him it looked great, admiration clear on her face. This was nothing like the wreck they had started with. Sienna arrived shortly after and pulled Murthia into a warm embrace the moment she saw her. The two of them held each other tightly, the reunion carrying a mix of congratulations and genuine affection. Inside, Murthia walked through the rooms, taking everything in. She wondered aloud if Isagi had overdone it, but then caught herself and admitted the place reflected his style perfectly. Everything had been arranged with care. Isagi watched her move through the house with quiet satisfaction as she settled into the space with her usual confidence and dedication. She made her way to the kitchen and started getting familiar with the layout. Then they headed upstairs together, where they found a bathroom complete with a proper tub. Murthia's eyes went wide. She had not expected something this comfortable in a village house. Isagi pulled out a book and turned to her. He asked if she could help him furnish the rest of the place. Murthia did not hesitate. She told him to leave it to her and got to work immediately, eager to turn the new house into a proper home. The house was up, but the inside was still mostly empty. Isagi noted that they did not have much furniture to work with, since they had only brought what they could carry. Murthia called out in surprise when she heard a familiar voice. Sienna had come by to check on them, and right behind her was Nea, who had rushed over the moment she heard about the new house. Murthia looked startled, and Nea peered inside with wide, curious eyes. Outside, Nea could not contain her amazement. She recognized that alchemy had been used to build the place, and she was both impressed and a little confused by what she was seeing. Isagi brushed off her reaction and told her it was no big deal. They chatted for a bit, with Nea asking questions and Isagi answering casually. Inside, Sienna was already exploring. She commented on how spacious the kitchen was, clearly delighted. But then she noticed that some of the cabinets were set too high for Murthia to reach comfortably. Murthia flushed slightly when it was pointed out. She insisted she could manage on her tiptoes, but Isagi offered to adjust the height with alchemy. It was a small fix, and he was happy to do it. The exchange was light and easy, the kind of thing that made the house feel a little more like theirs. Sienna mentioned she had some unused furniture and items at her place that they could bring over. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the group worked on gathering what they needed. The orange light of the evening settled over the village while they sorted through supplies and decided what to keep. By the time they were done, the house had changed completely. Murthia stood in the kitchen and said it finally looked like a real home. The rooms were furnished, a plant sat in the corner, and everything felt warm and lived in. Isagi walked into the main room and let out a satisfied sound when he saw the result. The space was comfortable, personal, and ready for what came next. Murthia placed a vase on the table as a finishing touch. She looked at the wall and thought it still felt a bit empty, making a mental note to add something later. Isagi suggested they have dinner first, smiling warmly. Murthia agreed, and the two of them settled into their first evening in the new house. Murthia brought out a steaming dish, and Isagi's eyes lit up. He said it looked incredible. She apologized in case the food was too plain, but Isagi shook his head and told her he actually preferred food like this. He meant it. She had also prepared Sienna's special milk soup with mushrooms and wild vegetables, along with bread from the magic bag. Murthia invited him to eat, and Isagi announced he was digging in. The meal was simple but warm, and he thanked her sincerely as they ate. Then, something shifted. Isagi noticed Murthia was still standing, waiting to serve rather than eat. He told her to sit down. They were not in the palace anymore, and nobody here would care about that kind of formality. Murthia hesitated, insisting that she still cared about proper conduct. The weight of the old rules was hard to shake, and her expression showed it. But Isagi was not backing down. He gestured to the seat across from him and told her to come eat with him. Murthia asked quietly if it was really all right. He told her it was. She paused for a moment, then accepted with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Isagi-sama. Please allow me to join you." She sat down, and the tension between old expectations and new beginnings finally eased. Outside, the night settled peacefully over the village, marking the quiet start of a life neither of them had imagined. They sat across from each other with the table between them, steam rising from the dishes. Isagi admitted that eating face to face like this felt different from what they were used to. Murthia agreed, but he told her not to overthink it. The room was warm, the food was ready, and that was all that mattered. A faint glow flickered across Isagi's jacket, a subtle trace of the alchemy that was woven into everything he wore. He took a bite and immediately noticed the sweetness from the milk. It was better than he expected. He asked Murthia about a vegetable he did not recognize, and she told him it was kilkuku grass, a wild plant found in the nearby forests. She explained that the stem was crunchy, while the leaves were tender, making it useful in all kinds of dishes. Isagi kept eating, savoring every part of the meal. He pointed out how the umami from the mushrooms and the saltiness of the ham blended perfectly with the sweetness of the milk. Even the bread, once soaked in the soup, turned soft and easy to chew. He leaned back and declared the soup was heavenly. He meant every word. After the meal, Murthia offered to handle the dishes. Isagi thanked her for the food, but she insisted on cleaning up herself. That was just who she was. Then, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Isagi mentioned something about the evening, and Murthia's face turned red. She clarified quickly what she had meant, but the misunderstanding had already taken hold. She told him firmly that she intended to stay and help, not just for tonight, but going forward. Isagi stared at her, caught completely off guard, while she stood her ground with flushed cheeks and steady eyes. When the moment passed, Isagi said something quietly that carried more weight than he probably intended. He was no longer a royal alchemist. That chapter of his life was over. Whatever came next would be something entirely new. Myrthia declared with quiet confidence that she could now devote her full attention to taking care of Isagi. He blinked, not quite sure how to respond. Before he could say anything, he pointed out that her room was not even ready yet, but Myrthia was already one step ahead. She opened a door upstairs and revealed a fully prepared room, her expression triumphant. She had already moved her things in without telling him. Isagi stood there, stunned, as she showed him where she had set up, clearly satisfied with her work. Then her tone shifted. She looked down and asked, almost hesitantly, whether it was really all right for her to stay. The confidence from a moment ago faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. Isagi was caught off guard by the sudden change. He told her it was fine, and she looked up with relief and gratitude, admitting quietly that she was truly happy. They stood together for a moment, Myrthia smiling warmly and Isagi clenching his fist as if steeling himself for what was ahead. But then a thought crossed his mind. He asked about her parents, specifically Kelsey, with an expression that said he already knew this might be a problem. Myrthia reassured him with a smile, saying she had already gotten her mother's permission. That did not exactly put Isagi at ease. Sienna approving was one thing. Kelsey was another matter entirely, and as if on cue, a massive figure appeared at the door. Kelsey stood there, towering over them, fury written across his face. Isagi nearly jumped out of his skin. Kelsey's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Come home now, Myrthia." His glare was intense enough to pin Isagi to the wall, but Myrthia did not flinch. She stepped forward, her hair swaying with the force of her conviction, and declared that she was staying. Together with Isagi. Her resolve was absolute, and her father's anger was not going to change that. The next morning, Isagi and Myrthia were ready to get to work. He suggested they start cultivating, and there was genuine excitement between them. But when Myrthia appeared at the house that morning, something was off. She stood in front of the door, looking downcast, and asked if he had spoken with Kelsey yet. Isagi looked at her, surprised by the question. Myrthia hesitated before explaining. She had not gotten her father's permission to live there after all. She would have to commute from home each day instead. She apologized, her voice heavy with regret. Isagi understood. Kelsey was protective, and Myrthia was his precious daughter. It made sense, even if it was not what either of them had hoped for. He told her not to stress over it too much. The last thing he wanted was for her to get into a fight with her father on his account. Besides, the idea of suddenly living together had made him a little nervous too. Myrthia seemed to relax slightly at that. Their conversation was cut short when a familiar voice called out from behind them. Nea appeared, her eyes wide with excitement the moment she spotted Myrthia. Myrthia's expression shifted instantly from regret to surprise. Nea threw herself into the reunion, thrilled to see her friend back in the village. She demanded to know why Myrthia had returned so suddenly, and the others watching nearby were just as curious. Nea looked at Isagi, then back at Myrthia. She confirmed who Myrthia was, then noticed Isagi standing beside her. A grin spread across her face. She asked if Myrthia had brought home a husband. Myrthia's face went bright red. No, it's not like that, she stammered, waving her hands frantically. Nea just laughed and said she understood, though her mischievous expression made it clear she did not believe a word of it. She pointed at the two of them with a knowing look, clearly enjoying every second of Myrthia's flustered reaction. Myrthia was still flustered when Nea reached forward and grabbed her hands, practically bouncing with excitement. Myrthia's eyes went wide, caught completely off guard by her friend's energy. Outside the house, the group settled into a proper introduction. Isagi told Nea that he was an alchemist, and that he had come to bring prosperity to the village through his work. Nea's face lit up. She said that sounded wonderful, and introduced herself as Myrthia's childhood friend, extending her hand to him with a warm smile. Myrthia stood between them, extending her hands in a calm, measured greeting. Her composure had returned, though just barely. A welcome banner hung behind them as Isagi took it all in. He felt a little nervous, but the kindness everyone had shown him was overwhelming. He quietly wondered whether Myrthia had personally arranged all of this. Myrthia stepped in front of the group with a firm look and asked bluntly if anyone had a problem with Isagi being there. Her tone left no room for argument. She was ready to defend his place in the village, and the determination on her face made that clear. Nea grinned and remarked on how different Myrthia acted when she was around someone she truly cared about. Myrthia's face flushed at the comment, but but before she could respond, Nea turned to Isagi and wished him luck with the crops. She waved and headed off, leaving the two of them alone. With the introductions behind him, Isagi turned his attention to the work ahead. He stood in the open field, wearing his cloak, and surveyed what he had accomplished so far. The house was built, and the field nearby was almost ready. He noticed a large rock in the way and decided to put it to use. He placed his hands on it and summoned a glowing alchemical circle, its intricate symbols spreading across the surface. He was already analyzing the stone, figuring out how to transform it into something useful for the farm. Isagi struck the rock with a burst of alchemical energy, and the stone began to reshape itself. What emerged was a massive stone golem, radiating with power. Isagi held up a glowing magic stone and pressed it into the golem's chest. The moment it locked into place, the golem came to life. He stepped back with a look of satisfaction and directed it toward the field. The golem moved as instructed, and Murthia watched alongside him with anticipation. Kelsey arrived just in time to see it in action. He stared at the golem in disbelief, asking what it was and how it worked. The others nearby were just as curious. Isagi explained that it would handle the heavy fieldwork for them, tilling the soil and preparing the land. Kelsey muttered that alchemy really was convenient, still not quite believing what he was seeing. Isagi assured him the golem was safe and would not attack anyone. While the golem worked, Isagi crouched down and examined the soil. He compared it to what he had worked with back in the Empire and noted that the conditions were similar enough for his crops to grow. The agricultural prospects were better than he had expected. Nearby, Murthia was spraying herbicide across the weeds, clearing the ground with quiet efficiency. She had barely acknowledged Kelsey since his arrival. The others noticed the distance between father and daughter and figured it was still about their argument over the living arrangements. Isagi caught the tension, but said nothing. He turned his attention to the next step. He told the group that he had a special fertilizer made through alchemy that could produce results almost immediately. They could harvest soon after planting. Everyone stared at him. The idea of crops growing that fast sounded impossible, and the surprise on their faces showed it. But Isagi was already moving forward, confident that his methods would speak for themselves. Isagi explained that he had added special properties to the formula to boost the nutritional value of the fertilizer. Kelsey looked surprised, so Isagi put it in simpler terms. It was alchemy-enhanced fertilizer, designed to improve the soil far beyond what normal methods could do. Murthia quietly apologized to Isagi for the tense atmosphere, aware that her coldness toward her father had not gone unnoticed. Isagi took the moment to say something that mattered. He told Murthia that family was irreplaceable. She looked at him, and the words sank in. Kelsey stood nearby, and for a brief moment, the distance between father and daughter seemed a little smaller. With that settled, Isagi suggested they begin by spreading the fertilizer. The golem joined in, working the field with a tool as Isagi directed. He walked them through each step methodically. First, they mixed the fertilizer into the soil, then divided it into neat rows with a shovel. The instructions were straightforward, and everyone followed along. Kelsey was impressed by how efficient the process was. He admitted that not having to wait months for results made all the difference. Isagi pulled out a bag of potatoes and explained that these were seeds he had improved through alchemy. They were hardier and faster growing than anything that occurred naturally. He instructed the group to plant the potatoes into the rows and water them right away. The rapid growth would take care of the rest. Isagi grabbed a bucket and poured water over the newly planted rows with more enthusiasm than anyone expected. The energy was contagious, and the others watched as the field came alive around them. Then it happened. Green shoots broke through the soil almost immediately. Kelsey's jaw dropped. He could not believe what he was seeing. Potatoes were supposed to take 3 to 4 months to mature, and here they were sprouting before his eyes. The power of alchemy was rewriting everything he thought he knew about farming. A butterfly drifted lazily over the green landscape as the morning settled in. The farmland around the house was alive with activity. Villagers with cat-like ears and tails moved through the fields, checking the crops and talking among themselves. Murthia stood at the edge, her dark hair catching the breeze as she watched the plants that had seemed impossible just hours ago. Isagi stood in the middle of the field, surrounded by an overwhelming wall of green. The crops had grown far beyond what anyone expected. Kelsey was beside him, staring at the dense foliage with a look somewhere between amazement and disbelief. The leaves were thick and layered, proof that the alchemy-enhanced soil had done its job and then some. The two of them moved through the rows, inspecting the plants. The leaves had turned yellow at the tips, and Isagi knew what that meant. He told Kelsey the crops were ready for harvest. Kelsey asked if they should check a few first, barely able to contain his excitement. Nia had joined them by then, and her eyes went wide as she watched Isagi reach into the soil and pull out a plant with his bare hands. He held up a cluster of large potatoes, grinning from ear to ear. They had done it. He shouted that it had worked, relief and pride mixing together in his voice. He had been confident, but seeing the result in his hands made it real. Murthia walked through the thriving field toward him, congratulating him warmly. The look on her face said everything. Kelsey could barely process what he was seeing. He pointed out that the potato plants were barely a day old, his voice cracking with disbelief. The group agreed to try the harvest right away and decided to cook some outdoors to celebrate. The field stretched out behind them under a clear sky, green and full and promising. For a village that had struggled with food for as long as anyone could remember, this was the beginning of something new. They set up outside Isagi's house, laying potatoes and supplies across a table on the green lawn. Murthia stood ready with a kitchen knife, focused and composed as she prepared the ingredients. Beside her sat a magical tool Isagi had made, a circular device with glowing geometric patterns etched into its surface. Kelsey leaned in to get a better look. He asked what it did, and Isagi explained that it created fire with just the push of a button. Kelsey watched as flames appeared on command, his expression shifting from confusion to genuine amazement. Isagi showed him that the fire's intensity could be adjusted with a lever on the side. Kelsey shook his head in wonder, calling the device a blessing for anyone who needed to cook. Isagi mentioned that creating tools like this was part of an alchemist's job. Sparks of magic flickered around his hands as he spoke, a reminder that everything on this table had come from his craft. Murthia took over from there. She heated the pan over medium flame and began sautéing the potatoes, flipping them once they turned golden brown on one side. She moved with the kind of calm precision that made the whole thing look effortless. She told the group to keep the heat low for 4 more minutes, and then it would be ready. When she plated the dish, the stir-fried potatoes glistened with butter, salt, and pepper. She announced it was done, and the group gathered around. The first bite said it all. Kelsey's eyes went wide, and he admitted it was delicious. Isagi agreed, noting the potatoes had a flavor that was deeper and richer than anything he had tasted before, a direct result of the alchemical enhancements. Smiles spread across every face at the table. For a simple meal cooked outdoors, it felt like something worth celebrating. Kelsey took another bite and stopped mid-chew. He said the flavor was completely different from anything they normally grew in the village. His eyes were wide with disbelief. He held up a potato and suddenly straightened, claiming he could feel a surge of energy rising through his body. Isagi explained that the beastkin's sharp senses were picking up on the potato's vitality-boosting properties. He added that the effect was mild, but the fact that Kelsey could feel it at all spoke to the quality of the crop. Around the village, life continued at its usual pace. A villager walked by carrying a stack of laundry, and others went about their daily routines. But the conversation at the table was already shifting towards something bigger. Isagi told Kelsey that if these alchemy-enhanced crops could thrive here, then other varieties could too. He pledged to take full responsibility for making that happen. His expression left no room for doubt. Kelsey stared at him for a moment, taken aback by the weight of what Isagi was promising. Isagi went on, explaining that he intended to grow a wide variety of enhanced crops. He believed that with the right approach, the land around the village could become truly fertile. His eyes moved across the vegetation around them as he spoke, already picturing what the fields could look like. Kelsey nodded firmly and told Isagi he was counting on him. The very next day, the results were already showing. The fields around the house were flourishing with large, vibrant plants and bright tomatoes. The land that had once been barren was now covered in rows of healthy crops stretching outward in every direction. Villagers moved through the fields, tending to the plants and marveling at what had grown. Isagi was right there with them, telling Murthia he planned to keep growing more and more. The village was changing, and the spirit of the people changing with it. Isagi looked around at the sea of green and let out a nervous laugh. He admitted sheepishly that he might have overdone it a little. Murthia stood beside him, took one look at the fields, and agreed without a hint of surprise. The golem stood nearby, holding a basket already overflowing with colorful produce, and Isagi could not help but stare at the sheer volume. He had planted far too many crops. He thought back to how frustrated he had been in the Empire, trying to grow anything in limited spaces. Now that he had all the land he could ask for, his excitement had gotten the better of him. He wiped his brow and admitted he had gone overboard. The fields were thriving, but there was no way he and Murthia could harvest all of this by themselves. They started working anyway, with the golem doing what it could. but Isagi told Murthia he was unfortunately out of magic stones, so they could not activate any more golems. She suggested asking her parents for help, and he agreed it was the best option. It was not long before Nia appeared, and her reaction was immediate. She froze and shouted in disbelief, unable to believe what the village looked like now. She said she had never seen a field this large in Primeia before. Kelsey arrived shortly after and confirmed that what Nia was seeing was real. He told her he had watched it happen with his own eyes just the day before. Even for him, the transformation was hard to believe. The mood shifted quickly from shock to excitement. The group agreed to start harvesting right away, and Isagi insisted on pitching in alongside everyone else. Murthia moved through the rows with a smile, picking vibrant produce one piece at a time. Nea grabbed a tomato and asked if she could try one. Isagi told her to go ahead, and the enthusiasm spread through the group like wildfire. Villagers joined in from all sides, working together with a kind of energy the village had not seen in a long time. What had started as one alchemist's mistake turned into a celebration of everything they had built together. Nia bit into a large tomato, her face already flushed with anticipation. The moment the flavor hit, her eyes went wide. What is this thing? It tastes incredible. She could not believe how sweet it was. Isagi watched her reaction with a grin and explained that the tomato's sweetness had been enhanced through alchemy, along with its growth speed. Murthia stood nearby holding her own tomato, curious. She asked if she could try one too, and Isagi nodded. She took a bite, and then another character with dark hair jumped in eagerly, unable to resist any longer. What followed was pure chaos. Nia teased Murthia about something, and Murthia did not take it lightly. She chased Nia across the field, while the others watched with amusement, the whole scene playing out like something from a festival rather than a harvest. 3 days passed, and the work was finally done. The group gathered to discuss what to do with all the crops. Isagi's magic bag was nearly at its limit, and there was far more produce than they could store. Someone suggested sharing it with the entire village and throwing a feast to mark the occasion. It would also give Isagi a chance to properly introduce himself to villagers he had not yet met. Isagi hesitated at first. The idea of a party felt like a lot to organize on short notice, but the others reassured him it would be nothing formal, just a simple gathering in the village square with food from the harvest. Their excitement was impossible to resist. He agreed, and the decision was made to hold it that very night. As evening approached, Isagi found himself wondering how many people would actually show up. He was still the new face in the village after all, but when he arrived at the square, the answer was obvious. The crowd was massive. He stared at the turnout, completely overwhelmed. Tables were set up, ingredients were laid out, and tomatoes, eggplants, and all kinds of produce filled every surface. The villagers threw themselves into the cooking with an energy that matched the harvest itself, and before long, the square was alive with the sounds and smells of a celebration. The tables were loaded with food, meat, pasta, rich soup, and dishes made entirely from the harvest filled every corner of the square. Someone called out to Isagi and waved him over. He looked up, surprised, and hurried to join the crowd. Kelsey stood beside him and addressed everyone. He thanked them for coming on short notice and praised the incredible variety of ingredients they now had, something the village had never known before. The crowd listened closely, and when Kelsey gestured toward Isagi as the person behind it all, Isagi felt his cheeks burn. He introduced himself to the villagers as an alchemist, stumbling through a stiff but sincere speech about how glad he was to have their support. The mood erupted into celebration. Kelsey raised a toast to welcome Isagi as a new resident, and the villagers cheered and lifted their drinks. The square came alive. Isagi looked around for a place to sit, but nearly every seat was taken. Murthia spotted him and called him over to an open spot she had saved. She had already set aside a plate for him. He sat down and found himself in front of a steaming bowl of pot au feu filled with vegetables. He took a bite and his face softened. The sweetness of the carrots and onions came through clearly, balanced by a mild spice that tied everything together. He told Murthia it was incredible, but as the evening went on, some of the villagers' excitement gave way to worry. A few of them admitted they were afraid of going back to their old empty meals once the feast was over. Isagi heard them and stood up. He told the crowd he would distribute seeds for the improved crops. He explained that they could thrive even in barren soil and were resistant to cold and disease. Anyone could grow them, not just an alchemist. The villagers stared at him, hardly daring to believe it. Some asked why he would give away something so valuable. Isagi paused. The memories came back to him, sharp and clear. He had been abandoned as a baby in the Imperial capital and raised in an orphanage where food was never enough. He knew what it felt like to go hungry. That was why he was doing this. He wanted to make sure no one else had to live through what he did. The crowd fell silent, and then something shifted. They understood him now, and the hope in their eyes was unmistakable. One of the villagers stepped forward and apologized for sounding doubtful earlier. His ears drooped with genuine regret. Isagi shook his head and told him not to worry about it. He said he probably would have felt the same way if he had been in their position. The crowd pressed closer, asking if the seeds could really be shared. They wanted to grow different crops and stop relying on whatever little they could pull from the forests. Isagi looked slightly overwhelmed by the demand, but he assured them he had plenty to go around. He explained that his research into food had been a constant since the day he became an alchemist. Hunger did not care about status or strength. It affected everyone the same way, and his goal had always been to put food in front of as many people as possible. Kelsey spoke up, adding that they needed to develop an agricultural system suited to their own land so the effort could last. The crowd agreed. The energy in the square had shifted from celebration into something more focused, more determined. As the moon rose over Primeia village, Kelsey raised his cup one final time. He called it a toast to the new hope of the village, and every voice in the square joined in. Cheers! The sound carried into the night, and for the first time in a long time, the village felt like it had a future. But far away, in Remulus Castle, the mood was very different. Prince Weiss sat on his throne as Galeus, the head of the alchemy department, delivered his latest report. Galeus boasted about increased production of magic tools, clearly proud of himself. But when Weiss asked about Isagi, Galeus answered without hesitation. He said he had fired the useless commoner, dismissing him as nothing more than dead weight. Weiss's expression darkened instantly. "You moron!" He was furious. He demanded to know what Galeus had been thinking. Isagi had not been wasting time. Weiss had personally entrusted him with improving the Empire's food production, and his research had been the key to addressing a growing crisis. Everything Galeus had thrown away was irreplaceable. Galeus stood frozen, the color draining from his face. He had expected praise, not rage. Outside the castle, Weiss's voice could still be heard as he gave a direct order. He wanted Isagi brought back immediately. The urgency in his tone made one thing clear. The Empire had made a terrible mistake, and now they were scrambling to undo it. Back in Primeia village, the changes were impossible to miss. Myrthia walked with purpose through the village as the agricultural boom continued to spread. Two villagers stopped an older woman to thank her for passing along the improved seeds. She marveled at how anything could grow in soil that had been barren for so long, all thanks to the enhanced crops Isagi had shared. But Myrthia had something else on her mind. She found Isagi and asked what was bothering him. He admitted that the fertilizer they were using was based on an Empire formula, and their supply would eventually run out. If they did not find a way to produce it locally, everything they had built could fall apart. The village's success depended on solving that problem before it was too late. Myrthia agreed. She said they needed to make their own fertilizer using ingredients found in and around the village. Isagi nodded and suggested they start by collecting samples from local farmers to see what was already available. They gathered what they could, but the results were disappointing. Only 3 types of fertilizer existed in the area, and none of them were strong enough on their own. The real hope, Isagi said, lay in the nearby forest. The magical aura surrounding it meant the plants there could have properties far beyond anything in the fields. Myrthia immediately volunteered to come along. Isagi hesitated, but she insisted. She reminded him that a maid's duties included protecting her master, even if it meant heading into dangerous territory. The others exchanged puzzled looks at her logic, but there was no arguing with her when she was like this. They set out together into the forest, and the difference was striking from the first step. The vegetation was lush and unlike anything in the Empire. Thick greenery surrounded them on all sides, a clear sign they were deep in the Beast Kingdom's territory. Isagi noticed a peculiar star-shaped plant growing nearby and pointed it out. Myrthia explained that the fierce natural competition in these forests drove the plants to evolve in unusual ways, giving them properties that could be exactly what they needed. Isagi examined the star-shaped plant more closely and realized it secreted acid when touched. He reminded himself to always inspect ingredients carefully. He focused his alchemist senses on the plant and identified it as an acid star native to the southern forests of the Beast Kingdom. He warned Myrthia that if the acid made contact with skin, it needed to be washed off immediately, but the plant was not useless. If squeezed properly, the acid inside could be extracted and turned into powerful solutions or herbicides. Myrthia asked what he planned to use them for, and Isagi said he wanted to collect as many as he could. She offered to hold one for him while he worked, and he thanked her. He carefully poked an acid star with a needle and drained the liquid into a collection tube. Once he had what he needed, he placed the collected plants into his magic bag. Myrthia helped with each step, keeping the operation smooth and steady. Isagi paused for a moment and admitted that he was enjoying himself. Gathering ingredients out in the wild was something he had never been allowed to do back in the Empire. That kind of work had always been left to knights and adventurers. Being here in the forest, doing it with his own hands, felt like the freedom he had been missing. Then, Myrthia's expression changed. She heard something. A large shape crashed through the trees ahead of them. It was a diablo, a massive, aggressive monster that relied on its fangs to attack. Isagi tensed up, but before he could react, Myrthia stepped in front of him. She told him to leave it to her. The diablo charged. Myrthia did not hesitate. She launched herself forward, meeting it head on. In one explosive leap, she was in the air, her body twisting against the backdrop of the forest. Her eyes were locked on the target. She threw a single punch with everything she had, and the impact was devastating. The diablo crumpled to the ground, knocked out cold in a single hit. Isagi stood there in stunned silence, watching the dust settle around the monster that had just been flattened by his maid. The diablo went flying into the forest from the force of Myrthia's punch. Isagi stared at her, unable to hide his shock. He had known beastkin were strong, but this was something else entirely. Myrthia turned back to him with a composed look and vowed that she would make sure he never had to worry about threats like that. She explained her background to him. As a beastkin working in the royal castle, she had needed superior combat skills just to survive. Her maid outfit, she said, actually worked in her favor because opponents never expected a maid to fight back. Isagi put the pieces together and realized that was why she had often worked at night during her time in the Empire. The thought left a bitter taste. Beastkin had been forced into dangerous roles simply because of the discrimination they faced. Myrthia's expression softened. She told Isagi she was grateful to have left that world behind and to be working alongside him instead. She said being by his side felt like the protection she had always wanted but never received. Isagi thanked her sincerely, telling her he appreciated everything she and others had done to keep things running safely. There was a brief moment of lightness when Myrthia insisted that standing guard at night was naturally a maid's duty. Isagi raised an eyebrow, fairly certain that was supposed to be a knight's job, but he let it go. He turned his attention to the fallen diablo. He explained to Myrthia that a magic stone was embedded inside the creature's body. He reached in and extracted it, holding up a large, glowing stone of exceptional quality. His eyes lit up as he examined it. Myrthia mentioned that monsters like this were common around the area. Isagi asked how the village dealt with them, and she told him they needed regular culling to keep the population from getting out of control. That gave Isagi an idea. He said the magic stones from these creatures could be used to create fertilizer, which would solve their supply problem far more efficiently than anything else they had tried. Myrthia's face brightened at the possibility, and she agreed it was worth pursuing. Before they moved on, Myrthia asked if she could take some time to harvest the diablo's meat. She mentioned that its meat was delicious, and that opportunities like this were rare compared to the Empire, where such things were never available to someone in her position. Isagi told her to go ahead, and she got to work. Isagi watched Myrthia prepare and said that out here, survival meant finding your own food and learning how to preserve it. A barrel and tools were already laid out on a cloth beside the fallen diablo. He noted that their lifestyle had changed completely. No one was shipping ingredients to them anymore. Everything had to come from their own hands. He asked Myrthia if she could show him how to butcher the creature. She agreed without hesitation, knife in hand, and focus sharp. She walked him through the process with the calm proficiency of someone who had done it many times before. Once they had finished and collected enough magic stones, Isagi confirmed they had plenty to work with for fertilizer. He held one up and watched it shimmer, already thinking about the next step. Myrthia raised a concern about how time-consuming mining for more materials would be. Isagi told her not to worry. As an alchemist, he could locate mineral deposits on his own. He suggested they investigate a nearby mountain, and Myrthia agreed. They looked toward it in the distance, its silhouette rising against the sky like a challenge waiting to be answered. The terrain grew rough as they climbed. Isagi struggled on the uneven ground, but Myrthia moved through it effortlessly, her beastkin agility making short work of the rocks and roots. Isagi tried not to look too impressed. They found an old mine entrance cut into the mountainside. The wooden supports inside were rotting, and the clay-reinforced walls showed clear signs of deterioration. It was not safe to go in as it stood. Isagi offered to stabilize the structure with alchemy, and Myrthia eagerly agreed. He placed his hands on the walls and channeled his magic through the supports, hardening the soil and strengthening the framework until the tunnel was solid again. With the entrance secured, they stepped inside. The darkness swallowed them almost immediately. Isagi stopped and realized he had forgotten to bring a light source. He apologized, embarrassed by the oversight. Murthia simply reminded him that Beastkin could see perfectly well in the dark. It was a detail he had not considered, and it was a quiet reminder of how different their worlds still were. Isagi reached into his bag and pulled out a magic lamp. He held it up, and light filled the tunnel, cutting through the darkness in an instant. He examined the device, impressed by how well it worked. Murthia took the lamp and held it steady as they moved deeper together, the glow casting long shadows across the reinforced walls. They walked side by side through the cave, the lantern lighting their path. Isagi ran his hand along the rough wall, using his alchemist senses to read the structure beneath the surface. Murthia stayed close, holding the lamp and watching his every move. Then he found it, a large mineral vein embedded deep in the rock. He pointed it out with obvious excitement. Murthia offered to help dig it out, but Isagi told her that would not be necessary. He explained that as an alchemist, he could target the weak points in the material's structure and use mana to break it down from the inside. He placed his hands on the rock and focused. The alchemy took hold, and the minerals began to crack and separate. Rock split apart as the magic worked through the vein, loosening ore in chunks. Isagi nodded in satisfaction and told Murthia he was ready to continue. She rolled up her sleeves and began gathering the pieces as they came free. The deeper he pushed into the vein, the more minerals surfaced. Gems and ores spilled forward in waves. Murthia called out to him urgently, warning him to step back before the flood of minerals reached where he was standing. He jolted and moved to safer ground just in time. They sat down together amid piles of colorful stones and began sorting through what they had pulled from the earth. Isagi identified the haul one piece at a time: iron, copper, lead, and mana-infused ore. Gold and gemstones too, though nothing as rare as adamantite or mithril. Murthia praised his skills and teased that any kingdom would pay a fortune for a miner like him. Isagi laughed dryly, admitting he had been routinely sent to do work like this back in the Empire as punishment. He shook off the memory and suggested they refine the materials right there. A burst of alchemical energy crackled through the cave as Isagi purified and compressed the ores into compact forms. The light from the reaction was intense, but he handled it with practiced ease. When it was done, he held up the finished materials with a look of quiet satisfaction. They packed everything into the magic bag and prepared to head back, the mining operation a clear success. Back at the farm, Isagi could barely contain his excitement. He told Murthia that with all the materials they had brought back, he could make more golems and even upgrade their base bodies into better farming tools. Murthia agreed right away, saying they could create all sorts of things now. Isagi grinned and hinted that he had one particular project in mind. Murthia tilted her head, puzzled. "That thing?" she asked, but he just kept smiling. He explained that he wanted to build a proper crafting workshop. He gestured toward the open space near the house and said it needed to be separate from where they lived. Alchemy involved dangerous substances and the occasional explosion, so keeping it away from the main building was just common sense. Murthia pictured the worst-case scenario and quickly understood why distance mattered. She offered to help with the construction, but Isagi politely turned her down. He asked her to focus on the harvest instead, since the farm work still came first. Murthia nodded and headed off to join the others in the fields without complaint. Once she was gone, Isagi got to work planning. He mapped out the size and layout, and a wave of satisfaction hit him as the design came together. This was the kind of workspace he had always dreamed of having. He settled on a simple but functional floor plan with a main workspace and a storage room, then sketched it out. He started gathering materials, Trent wood for the frame, bricks for the walls. He mixed cement and sand together in a container and used alchemy to blend the mortar to a perfect consistency. Once it was ready, he began laying bricks for the foundation. Row by row, the walls took shape. He lined up bricks along the outer edges, spread mortar between each layer, and stacked the next course on top. The progress was steady and impressive, the structure rising faster than any ordinary builder could manage. By the time Murthia came to check on things, the building was nearly finished. She looked over the work with wide eyes, asking how far along he was. The completed exterior stood before her, a charming and well-built workshop that looked every bit the part of a real alchemist's workspace. Murthia stepped inside and took it all in. She admired the craftsmanship and told him it looked wonderful. She had brought a box with her, already thinking about how to organize the interior. Isagi greeted her warmly from inside, his voice full of energy. He could not wait to put the new space to use. Isagi was already working on the interior when Mirthia arrived. He told her she had come at the perfect time and waved her in to look around. Mirthia glanced around the room, taking in every detail with obvious curiosity. She told him the inside looked really nice. Isagi beamed and explained that he had adjusted the resin ratio of the walls to cut down on glare, which made the light softer and warmer. He added that he had gone with brick for the walls to give the place a more classic feel. There was clear pride in his voice as he pointed out each detail. Mirthia congratulated him, her face lighting up. She said she was genuinely happy that he finally had a proper alchemy workshop of his own. Isagi thanked her and said he could now conduct his research freely without worrying about space. Then, almost as an afterthought, he casually asked if she could put a bed in the workshop so he could nap between experiments. Mirthia shut that down immediately. She pictured exactly what would happen. Isagi sprawled out in bed inside the workshop, doing nothing. If I put a bed in, a lazy person like Isagi-sama will end up just sleeping in the workshop, she said flatly. Isagi acted shocked that she had seen right through him. He protested half-heartedly, as if the refusal were some great injustice, but he already knew he had lost. Mirthia held firm. She told him it was important to live a healthy lifestyle and that he needed to sleep properly at home. His well-being came first, no matter how convenient a workshop bed sounded. Isagi sighed and gave in. He told her he understood. With the argument settled, he suggested they get started on making fertilizer, and the conversation shifted back to work. With the workshop ready, it was time to tackle the fertilizer. Isagi and Mirthia got straight to it. Mirthia held up a document she had prepared as they reviewed plant growth data together. Isagi joked about making fertilizer as a team effort, and Mirthia went along with it. Out in the fields, Isagi gathered materials he had brought back from the mines. He held up a leafy plant and explained that he wanted to create a fertilizer specifically suited to the local soil. He was confident they could make something better than what the village currently had. Back inside, they went over the details. Primeia village already used 3 types of traditional fertilizer, but Mirthia had compiled detailed growth records and admitted that none of them measured up to what the Empire produced. Isagi studied her data carefully. He noted that combining their existing fertilizer with other materials could close the gap, but the cost and quality still fell short of Imperial standards. Then, the topic shifted to monastones. Isagi mentioned their value, and Mirthia told him that in the Empire, high-quality monastones could sell for up to 20 silver coins each. She added that monastones were actually common in the Primeia region, which most people in the capital would never guess. Isagi pulled out a stone and held it up. "I create the finest of these mana stones possible," he said proudly. He proposed adding mana stones to the fertilizer mix. To make it work, he would need to stabilize the chaotic mana inside the stones first. He got to work. Alchemical energy flowed through his hands as he drew out impurities and brought the mana into balance. The stone began to glow, its surface smoothing out until it shone like polished crystal. Mirthia watched in silence, then pointed out that stones refined to that level were rare enough to be used as jewelry by the nobility. She asked what he planned to do with them. "Grind them up and mix them into the fertilizer," Isagi replied without hesitation. To him, they were just raw materials. Mirthia stared at him, caught off guard by how casually he dismissed their worth. Isagi noticed her reaction and apologized, but she shook her head and told him not to worry about it. Isagi briefly considered making jewelry from the refined mana stones as a gift, but he pushed the thought aside. There was research to do. He and Mirthia discussed the different growth factors they could target with the fertilizer, including pest resistance and faster decomposition. Each material they had gathered from the mines offered something different. Isagi suggested they test the experimental fertilizer right away. He grabbed a pot labeled No Dalzijour 2, filled it with soil, and mixed in the new fertilizer. He planted a batch of enhanced arugula seeds, covered them, and added water. Within moments, green shoots broke through the surface. Mirthia watched in disbelief as the sprouts climbed upward at an impossible speed. The arugula filled the pot in seconds and kept going. It grew taller and taller, stretching toward the ceiling with no sign of slowing down. Mirthia called out in alarm, worried the plant would tear through the roof and wreck the workshop they had just built. Isagi reacted fast, channeling his mana to contain the growth before it could do any real damage. He managed to bring it under control. They both stood there, catching their breath, staring at the overgrown plant. Isagi muttered that he had nearly destroyed his own workshop on the very first experiment. They debated what had caused such extreme growth. It could have been the thriving grass factors in the mix, or the high-quality mana energy from the stones pushing the plant far beyond what they had expected. Isagi decided they needed to adjust the formula. He suggested removing the raw mana energy from the stones and experimenting with different material combinations to find the right balance. It would take time, but there was no shortcut to getting it right. Myrthia told him she was ready to help for as long as it took. She said she enjoyed contributing, even in small ways. Isagi appreciated that and got back to work. He set up the next test. Seeds went into pot number 002 again. Fertilizer mixed in, and they waited. The plant exploded upward just like before. Isagi scrambled to contain it, but the result was another failure. He tried again and again, adjusting the ratios each time. By the time they reached experiment number 013, the results were still off. The growth either too aggressive or stunted in the wrong direction. Each attempt brought them closer, but the setbacks kept piling up. The experiments kept going. Pots lined the workshop shelves, each one numbered and tracked. By the time Isagi reached number 7, the place looked more like a greenhouse than an alchemy lab. Myrthia checked on the rows of pots regularly, keeping notes on each result. Inside, Isagi was hunched over his desk, scribbling furiously. He had thrown himself completely into the work. At one point, he paused and admitted that working alone like this reminded him of his days in the Empire. He said it made him nostalgic, quietly improving things one step at a time without anyone watching. He moved on to the next trial. He planted bell pepper seeds in pot number 252, mixed in his latest formula, and waited. The plant grew quickly, pushing upward with strong stems and full leaves. Then it stopped. Myrthia leaned in and confirmed that the growth had stabilized. Isagi compared the results against his records and realized it matched Empire-level fertilizer. His face lit up. He held up the bell pepper plant with both hands, unable to contain himself. He said the 3 weeks of intense, non-stop focus had been completely worth it. Myrthia beamed alongside him, noting that they had finally achieved stable agricultural production. Isagi agreed and said the village's food supply was now secure. Myrthia added that the consistency of the fertilizer was the real breakthrough, meaning they could rely on it going forward. Isagi then wondered aloud whether he should share the formula with other alchemists in town. He quickly had second thoughts though, suspecting they might not be able to replicate it without the same technical knowledge. Myrthia suggested he could try simplifying the process to make it more accessible. Isagi considered it, but said that was a problem for another day. Behind them, the apple tree from experiment number 252 stood tall, proof that the formula worked on more than just vegetables. Myrthia told him he should go for a walk now that the work was done. She said he needed the exercise after being cooped up for 3 straight weeks. She stumbled over her words a little, which made the suggestion sound more like friendly nagging than a formal request. Isagi thought about it and decided she was probably right. They stepped outside, and the view stopped him in his tracks. The fields stretched out in every direction, green and full. The barren grasslands they had arrived to were gone, replaced by rows of thriving crops tended by dozens of villagers. Someone mentioned that it was all thanks to Isagi, sharing his improved seeds. Another remarked at how much had changed in just 3 weeks and credited the hard work of everyone in the village. Isagi looked out over it all, a quiet warmth settling in his chest. The villagers spotted Isagi walking through the farm and immediately crowded around him. A woman called out his name with a bright smile, and others followed, their faces full of gratitude. A muscular man holding a farming tool thanked him directly, gesturing at the rows of lush crops behind him. A girl nearby clutched a sack of produce and bowed, thanking him over and over. People gathered around the harvest, admiring the vegetables. One of them held up a cucumber and said that just one bite filled you with energy. Myrthia stood among them, eyes closed and content. She explained that it was only natural, since Isagi had made the crops to be exactly like that. There was quiet pride in her voice. A red-haired villager laughed and admitted there was no arguing with the results. Someone held up a ripe tomato, and another villager pushed a full crate of them toward Isagi, insisting he take some from their garden. Before he could respond, more offers came flooding in. One person shouted for him to take their cucumbers, another their eggplants. The generous exchange kept going, villager after villager pressing their best produce into his hands. Beyond the immediate crowd, the watermelon patches and farmland stretched out endlessly. 2 villagers stood at the edge of the fields and marveled at the transformation. They said that not long ago, the whole area had been nothing but grassland, and now it was farmland as far as the eye could see. Then a new figure appeared on the road leading into Primeia village, a small person carrying oversized luggage, looking around with wide, surprised eyes. They stopped and took in the sight of the thriving settlement. "So this is the current Primeia village," they murmured, clearly not expecting what they had found. A tiny guest had arrived in Primeia village. Back at the house, Isagi and Murthia were finishing up after a meal, talking about how good the vegetables from town had been. Isagi offered to help with the cleanup, and Murthia accepted. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet rhythm that came naturally after spending so much time together. Isagi, feeling at ease, casually remarked that they worked together like a married couple. Murthia's face went bright red. She stammered, clearly flustered, and tried to brush it off. The awkward moment lingered just long enough to be funny before the mood settled again. A knock interrupted them. Someone outside asked if the alchemist was home. Murthia's expression shifted, a flicker of irritation crossing her face, though she kept it professional. She told Isagi she would handle the rest of the chores and sent him to greet the visitor. Isagi stepped outside and looked around, confused. A voice told him to look down. Standing in front of him was a small, energetic girl with fox-like ears, barely reaching his waist. She introduced herself as Konya from the Wonderful Trading Company and said she had come to discuss a business matter with him. When he invited her inside, Konya tried to squeeze through the doorway, but her enormous backpack got stuck. She backed up, apologized for the clumsy entrance, and reintroduced herself more formally. Murthia watched from nearby with polite curiosity. Konya glanced between Isagi and Murthia and asked if Murthia was his wife. Murthia froze. Isagi quickly corrected her, explaining that Murthia was his maid and the daughter of the village chief. Murthia relaxed, though a trace of something unreadable lingered on her face. They all sat down at the table. Murthia served drinks and made a quiet comment about the complexity of a woman's mind. Konya took one sip and her eyes went wide. She said it was delicious and asked what it was. Murthia explained it was made from goji leaves gathered in the nearby forest. Konya took another sip and noted the subtle sweetness hidden beneath the bitterness. She immediately declared she wanted to buy some and whipped out a notebook, scribbling notes at impressive speed. Murthia stared, wondering where the notebook had even come from. Isagi asked Murthia what she knew about the Wonderful Trading Company. Murthia explained that it was one of the largest trading companies in the entire Beastman Kingdom. Its headquarters sat in the royal capital, with branches spread across other cities. All of its staff were canine-type beastmen. She compared it to a major merchant guild in terms of reach and influence. Konya picked up from there. She said there had been a recent surge of high-quality produce appearing on the market, and she had been tasked with tracing its origin. Her search led her to a farmer, who pointed her toward Primeia village. When she finally got her hands on the crops, she was stunned by the quality and flavor. That was what had brought her all the way out here. Isagi put the pieces together. He figured the villagers must have been selling their surplus to neighboring towns on their own. Konya confirmed it. She said the produce from Primeia was clearly superior to anything else on the market, and she wanted to know why. Isagi explained that he had used alchemy to enhance the crops, adjusting their growth in ways that ordinary planting methods could never replicate. Konya was surprised to hear that alchemy could be applied to farming. She praised the intelligent use of resources and wasted no time getting to the point. She proposed a regular supply agreement between Primeia village and the Wonderful Trading Company. The details came together quickly. Isagi had one condition. He wanted priority access to alchemical ingredients through the company's network. Murthia assured him that the trading company could source whatever he needed from within the Beastman Kingdom. They discussed export volumes next, but the numbers told a clear story. The harvest and the current exports were nearly equal, which meant there was almost no room to increase production without turning the entire operation into a full-time farming enterprise. Isagi and Murthia both fell silent, weighing the limitation. Their workforce consisted of just the two of them and the golems. There simply were not enough hands to scale up. Then, someone floated the obvious solution: hire more people. The idea landed with an awkward pause. Isagi and Murthia looked at each other, both realizing at the same time that it had never once crossed their minds. They had been so focused on doing everything themselves that the simplest answer had completely escaped them. Isagi thought about it and realized his habit of trying to handle everything himself might be holding him back. Konya pointed out that he should delegate the farming duties and focus on what only he could do. alchemy. Murthia backed her up immediately, telling him that Konia was right and that he should leave the fieldwork to others so he could concentrate on his research. Isagi nodded firmly and agreed. Then the idea grew bigger. He proposed using the remaining unused land to create a large-scale farm. Konya and Murthia both jumped on it. They stepped outside and looked over the open fields, stretching beyond the current plots. Konya could barely contain herself, calling it a fantastic idea and repeating the words mega farm like she was already picturing the profits. She promised that the wonderful trading company would sell the crops everywhere and bring real wealth back to the village. The benefits would go both ways, she said. Good for Primeia and good for the company. She and Isagi shook hands, both saying they looked forward to working together. The partnership was official. Back inside, Isagi sat at his desk and turned his attention to the practical side of things. Murthia asked what the plan was for staffing the farm. Isagi said he would start by recruiting from the village. He wondered whether standard wages would be enough to attract workers, though. He admitted that the food situation had improved so much lately that he was not sure anyone would feel the need to take on extra work. Murthia reassured him. She said the villagers would want to be part of it, and that this was a chance for them to gain something meaningful. She then suggested letting workers grow unique crops that had not been shared with the rest of the village yet, things only Isagi's farm could produce. Isagi's eyes lit up. He called it a great idea and started listing possibilities. Apples, bananas, and other fruits the village had never seen before. When grapes came up, Murthia's expression changed. She admitted she had a deep fondness for them and seemed genuinely disappointed that she had not gotten to work with them yet. She asked Isagi to let her know the moment they started growing them, and he promised he would. With the crop plans in place, Isagi circled back to recruitment. He noted that the increased workload meant the base salary would need to be higher than usual. He decided to post a job listing and hoped for a smooth start. He muttered to himself that things should go well, though the weight of building something this big was clearly on his mind. 5 days passed. Isagi sat reading a book, expecting responses to the recruitment notice any time now. Before he could finish the page, Murthia rushed in, asking if anyone had applied. Right behind her came Nia, staggering under an enormous stack of papers. She dropped the pile on the table and announced that there were far too many applications. The number of people who had applied was 10 times the positions available. Isagi and Murthia stared at the stack in disbelief. Word had spread fast. Villagers gathered near the farm, wishing the mega farm good luck and buzzing with excitement. Murthia flipped through the applications, her eyes lingering on one in particular. People in the crowd recognized them and called out to Isagi and Murthia by name, waving and smiling. Isagi spotted a familiar face among the applicants. He asked if Nia had applied too. She grinned and told him of course she had. Isagi admitted he wanted to hire everyone, but with this many applicants, they would need a proper evaluation process. A few of the hopefuls shifted nervously at that. Murthia stepped in and assured the group that the evaluation would be fair and orderly. One applicant jokingly begged not to be eliminated, which got a laugh from the crowd. Isagi looked out at all the eager faces and felt a swell of pride that so many people wanted to work at his farm. The next day, the evaluation began outside the house. Candidates lined up and waited while Isagi and Murthia reviewed the applications together. When the results were announced, those who had been selected cheered. One of them pumped a fist in the air and shouted that it was awesome. The new hires introduced themselves one by one. Nea went first, saying she had experience from helping her grandfather with his farm. Next was Rhodos, a large and sturdy man who said his main strengths were physical power and stamina. Last was Nola, a rabbit-eared girl who mentioned her accounting skills and experience working on her father's small vegetable farm. Each of them spoke with genuine enthusiasm. The team was small, but the range of skills they brought to the table was exactly what the mega farm needed. The introductions continued. Ricardo stepped forward and explained that he used to be a hunter, but had since started cultivating fields using crops Isagi had given him. He had cleared a good amount of land on his own, and his hands-on approach seemed like a natural fit for the farm. After him came Ragumunto, who looked less certain. He asked quietly if it was really all right for him to be hired. He said his farming experience was similar to Ricardo's, nothing special. Isagi told him not to worry. He brought up the time Ragumunto had spoken his mind at the village feast, saying things others were too polite to say. Isagi told him that was exactly why he wanted him on the team. Honesty and directness mattered more than experience. Ragumunto relaxed, and the rest of the group stood behind them, the full team now assembled. With everyone on board, it was time to get to work. Murthia held up a sheet listing the day's harvest: eggplants, cucumbers, tomatoes, bell peppers, and napa cabbage. She rallied the team with an encouraging word, but one of them looked at the list and asked if it was a bit much for the first day. Murthia explained that while the workload was heavy, the pay reflected it. She added that they were welcome to bring produce home with them, which lifted the mood. Still, she admitted to herself that she might have pushed the pace a little too hard right out of the gate. Isagi stepped in and said he would handle the workshop side of things, while the rest of them focused on the fields. In the workshop, Isagi turned his attention to the fruit crops. He noted that the strawberries, apples, and bananas still needed more time to mature. There was nothing to do but wait on those. Someone encouraged him to keep working on his plant growth research in the meantime, and he agreed. As he settled in, his mind drifted back to his time in the royal capital. He remembered secretly drafting blueprints for magic tools during quiet hours. Some of those designs had never left the planning stage. Others had been impossible to build because the right materials were not available. Now, with a proper workshop and access to new resources, things were different. He pulled out his old notes and felt a spark of determination. It was time to develop a real magic tool. Isagi flipped through his old blueprints and stopped on one in particular. His eyes went wide. "Found it!" he shouted, startling Nea so badly she nearly jumped out of her skin. He apologized and got back to work, ideas already racing through his head. That evening, the team gathered inside the house after a long day in the fields. Everyone looked exhausted. Murthia thanked them all for their hard work, and one of them groaned that they had not felt this tired in ages. Someone pointed out that Murthia herself did not seem tired at all, which earned her a round of impressed looks. Another started to say it was even busier than expected, but trailed off, too worn out to finish the thought. At a second table nearby, the rest of the group sat slumped in their seats. One of them wondered aloud if this level of exhaustion was going to be a daily thing and let out a tired laugh. Another admitted they were wiped out, but said everyone had really pulled their weight. The mood was drained, but satisfied. Isagi walked in with a grin on his face. He told them he wanted to treat them to something special for all their effort. Before anyone could ask, he set a strange device on the table and announced it with dramatic flair. Prototype blender number 1. The room went quiet. Someone leaned forward and asked what it was. Isagi explained the mechanism, pointing out the magical components that powered it. He sliced up some fruit, dropped the pieces into the blender with water, and switched it on. A few of the employees panicked, protesting that he was wasting precious fruit. Isagi told them to calm down and let the machine do its work. Moments later, he poured out glasses of freshly made apple juice. Hands shot up around the table, everyone calling out that they wanted some too. The first sip landed and the reactions were immediate. One of them declared it was delicious. Another could not believe the flavor came from nothing but apples and water. Isagi was not done. He swapped in new ingredients and added milk this time, producing banana milk and strawberry milk. He set the glasses down in front of the curious group. They tasted the new drinks, and the room lit up all over again. Someone closed their eyes and described the rich aroma and sweetness of the strawberries, visibly savoring every drop. The exhaustion from the day melted away as the whole team sat together, drinking and smiling. Isagi looked around the table and smiled, saying he was glad everyone liked the drinks. One of the employees raised a glass and rallied the group, telling them to give it their best again tomorrow. Nola and the others cheered in agreement, the mood light and warm despite the long day. In the other room, Murthia stood with a thoughtful expression. She offered to go fetch a container for the leftover juice, already thinking practically. As she moved to leave, she turned to Isagi with a bright smile and told him his strategy was clever. She teased that rewarding hard work with delicious fruit was a classic carrot and stick approach. Isagi laughed and admitted the thought had never crossed his mind. He had just wanted to share something good. He glanced around the room and felt a quiet surge of happiness, seeing everyone working together like this. Murthia noticed his expression and agreed, closing her eyes with a contented smile. Isagi mentioned that he had saved a drink for Murthia. He suggested they taste it together before offering the rest to the others. Murthia paused, caught off guard by the gesture. For a moment, she said nothing. Then they raised their glasses and toasted. Outside, the farm stretched wide under the evening sky, thriving and full of life. The next day, Murthia asked Isagi to come out and help adjust the crops. As they walked, they reviewed a map of the farm and discussed how far things had come. Isagi noted with pride that the operation had grown large enough to truly deserve the name Mega Farm. But with that size came a new problem. Patrolling the entire area on foot took far too long. Isagi stopped and told Murthia he had an idea. He pulled out some refined copper and got to work. Alchemical energy flowed through his hands, and the metal twisted and shaped itself into a four-legged form. When the light faded, a horse golem stood before them. Murthia stared at it in admiration, relieved that they finally had a way to cover ground quickly. Isagi checked his supplies and realized he was out of materials, but at least the first one was done. He climbed onto the golem and told Murthia to hold on tight. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed on. The golem took off at a sprint, and Murthia's eyes went wide as the wind rushed past them. The speed was thrilling and a little terrifying, but she held on, pressing close as they raced across the open farmland. As they rode, Isagi noticed a faint sound coming from Murthia, a low, rhythmic purring. He glanced back and asked if that purring sound was coming from her. Murthia's face flushed instantly. She clung tighter to him and stammered that it was nothing. Isagi thought about it for a moment, puzzled, but let it go. Murthia kept her face hidden against his back, mortified. They continued their ride across the farm, the golem covering ground effortlessly. When they reached the vegetable fields, Rhodos was already there. Isagi greeted him and asked how things were going. He checked the crops, made a few adjustments, and told Rhodos to keep up the good work before moving on. Their next stop was the Plummy House, a facility with a transparent dome designed for growing plants in a controlled environment. Isagi stepped inside and checked the readings. He confirmed that the temperature management was working fine. He studied the plants for a moment and decided it was better to slow down their growth rate. Letting them develop at a natural pace would produce better results than forcing speed. As they reviewed things together, Murthia murmured something under her breath. Isagi turned and asked if she had just said something. She shook her head quickly and told him it was nothing, steering the conversation back to the task at hand. Before they could finish, someone came running toward them in a panic. One of the workers shouted that the orchard was in trouble. Isagi and Murthia exchanged a look and took off immediately. When they arrived, the sight stopped them cold. The field was torn apart, plants uprooted, crops crushed and scattered across the ground. Isagi's expression hardened. He said this kind of destruction did not look natural at all. The worker confirmed it, saying the field had been fine the day before, but looked like this when they arrived that morning. Isagi inspected the damage more closely and found that only the watermelon field had been hit. The rest of the crops were untouched, which was a small relief in the middle of the mess. Nia stood off to the side, her face filled with guilt. She apologized quietly, as though she felt responsible for not preventing it. Isagi told her not to blame herself. Guarding the fields at night was impossible with their current setup. There was no point dwelling on it. He rallied everyone and said the priority now was cleaning up the damaged area so they could get things back on track. As they cleaned up, Isagi crouched down and examined the ground. Large footprints were pressed deep into the soil, and a broken piece of fencing lay nearby. He pointed them out and said the marks were far too big to be from any ordinary animal. Murthia looked closer and agreed that something was off. Nea called out to them from across the field, waving them over. She told them to come look at what she had found. When they reached her, she mentioned picking up a wild scent in the area. Murthia leaned in, her beastkin senses sharpening. She sniffed the air carefully and confirmed that whatever had done this was not human. They found a tuft of dark fur caught on a broken stake. Murthia identified it as most likely belonging to black wolves. Nia explained that black wolves always moved in packs and were extremely difficult to deal with once they targeted an area. Murthia added that she was confident in her ability to read scent trails, and everything pointed to a pack of black wolves being responsible. That night, they gathered to discuss what to do. Someone asked whether the wolves would come back. Isagi said the pack had likely been drawn by the scent of the watermelons, and once wolves attacked a place successfully, they almost always returned. The same instinct that brought bears back to raided camps applied here. One of the workers asked nervously what they should do now. Isagi's expression turned firm. He said the only option was to take the initiative and strike first before the wolves could hit the farm again. He turned to the workers and told them to protect the farm while he was gone. Every golem on the property was ordered to stop its regular tasks and focus entirely on defense. Murthia confirmed the order with a sharp nod. Isagi mounted the golem horse and announced he would follow the footprints into the forest. Murthia insisted on going with him. He did not argue. They rode out together, expressions set with determination. The trail led them deeper and deeper into the trees. Murthia tracked the faint scent as it wound through the undergrowth. Then, Her horse suddenly tensed beneath her. She stiffened and told Isagi the scent of the black wolves had grown much stronger all at once. This was the place. Before either of them could react, a chill ran through the air. Isagi's eyes swept the shadows between the trees. He said quietly that it was possible they had been lured into a trap. Dark shapes shifted in the brush around them. Since when? He whispered, realizing the wolves had been waiting. Isagi's mind raced. The black wolves had not just attacked the farm at random. They had drawn him and Myrthia out here deliberately. These creatures could think strategically. His face went pale as the weight of that realization sank in. Myrthia's ears flattened against her head. She scanned the tree line, her eyes sharp, but her body tense. Before Isagi could call out to her, a black wolf lunged from above, crashing down between them. "Isagi-sama!" Myrthia screamed, throwing herself sideways to avoid the strike. The golem horse reared and veered hard off the path. Isagi grabbed hold and looked back, just in time to see more shadows pouring out from the underbrush. He shouted that they were coming from every direction. Wolves surged toward them, teeth bared and moving fast. Isagi slid off the horse, hitting the ground and scrambling to his feet. A massive wolf loomed over him, close enough that he could feel its breath. He stumbled backward, trying to put distance between himself and the creature. More wolves closed in from the sides. Myrthia planted herself in front of him, her expression locked with fierce determination as she assessed how many they were facing. A memory flashed through Isagi's mind. He was back in the Imperial capital, sitting at a desk, flipping through classified documents on dangerous magical beasts. One entry had made him stop cold. The Shadow Wolf, an apex predator with an extermination rank of A from the Adventurers Guild. It took a coordinated squad of trained knights just to bring down a single one. He snapped back to the present. Standing at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the dark forest, was a wolf far larger than the rest. Its body seemed to bleed into the shadows around it, and its eyes burned with a cold, intelligent light. This was no ordinary black wolf. Myrthia stood between Isagi and the creature, feet set, refusing to give ground. Isagi stared past her at the massive beast and said the words aloud, his voice barely steady. The Shadow Wolf. The Shadow Wolf stood motionless at the edge of the clearing, its pack fanning out around it. The smaller wolves crept closer, tightening the circle. Isagi cursed under his breath. He admitted they had made a mistake by not preparing for a worst-case scenario. They should have brought more combat support. He turned to Myrthia and asked her directly, could she take the Shadow Wolf down? Myrthia hesitated, then said it was 50-50 at best. One-on-one, she might manage it, but with the entire pack closing in, the odds were not in their favor. Isagi told her he would back her up, however he could to tip those odds. Myrthia's expression hardened. She stepped forward and told him to listen carefully. I'll buy us some time. Isagi-sama, please take this chance to run. Her voice left no room for argument. Isagi stared at her in disbelief. He told her flatly that he was not going anywhere. She had been by his side since the day the Empire threw him out. When no one else stood with him, she did. When he was exiled from the capital with nothing, she followed without a second thought. He said there was absolutely no way he could leave her behind now. Myrthia's composure cracked for just a moment. Her cheeks flushed and her eyes glistened, but she held herself together. While the two of them argued, the Shadow Wolf watched from its position with an almost lazy calm. Then it spoke. Foolish creatures, it rumbled, its voice low and heavy with contempt. The intelligence behind those eyes was unmistakable. It was not a mindless beast. It was deciding what to do with them. Isagi noticed something. The wolf had not attacked yet. It was observing, waiting, perhaps even curious. If it had wanted them dead, it could have given the order already. That hesitation meant there might still be room to talk. He stepped forward, past Myrthia, and addressed the Shadow Wolf directly. He proposed a deal. Instead of fighting, he offered to provide watermelons and other crops from the farm in exchange for the wolf and its pack guarding the property. The Shadow Wolf's eyes flared with anger. Its fur bristled, and the air around it seemed to darken. Being compared to a guard dog was clearly an insult. Myrthia tensed behind Isagi, ready to move if the wolf struck, but Isagi did not back down. He explained calmly that it did not have to be servitude. The arrangement could be built on mutual respect. The wolf would protect the farm because it benefited from doing so, not because it was ordered to. How that relationship looked, Isagi said, depended entirely on the wolf's choice. The Shadow Wolf said nothing. Its glowing eyes stayed locked on Isagi, weighing him. The tension hung in the air, unresolved, but no longer spiraling toward violence. Isagi smiled and pressed his case. He told the Shadow Wolf that from its kind's perspective, humans were just cattle who happened to serve up tasty food. He said it lightly, almost laughing, as though the power dynamic did not bother him at all. The Shadow Wolf's eyes narrowed with a flicker of irritation, but also interest. Isagi kept talking, as two of the smaller wolves fell in step beside him. He explained that the farm grew far more than just watermelons. There were all kinds of delicious crops, enough variety to keep even a beast with refined taste satisfied. He turned back to the Shadow Wolf and asked plainly what it wanted to do. The wolf snarled, but did not strike. Something in Isagi's confidence had given it pause. They made it back to the farm as evening settled in. Nea and the others were already out searching with lanterns, calling their names. When they spotted Isagi and Murthia walking back, Nea shouted in relief that they had returned safely. Isagi apologized for being late, explaining that the Golem horse had broken down on the way back. The mood among the group loosened as everyone gathered around them. One of the workers asked if either of them was hurt. Isagi reassured him that they were fine, just lucky. The worker then brought up the black wolves in a cautious tone, asking what had happened out there. Isagi opened his mouth to explain, but before he could get a word out, a massive shadow materialized behind him. The Shadow Wolf appeared without warning, stepping out of the darkness as if it had been there the whole time. The workers panicked. Someone screamed and stumbled backward. Others froze in place. One of them stammered that the creature seemed to be hiding inside Isagi's shadow. Isagi raised his hands and told everyone to stay calm. He turned to the wolf and said it was time to come out properly, his tone steady but careful. The chaos settled enough for Isagi to explain. He laid out the deal he had struck with the Shadow Wolf. The pack would guard the farm at night in exchange for receiving produce every 5 days. He assured the wolf that the quality of the farm's harvest would not disappoint, and the creature seemed satisfied with what it had already tasted. From there, they worked out the rules together. No attacking humans, no damaging the crops. The wolves would protect the farm from other monsters in the area. In return, they would be fed well and left in peace. Both sides agreed to coexist on terms of mutual respect. It was not trust yet, but it was a start. Isagi added one more point. He told the Shadow Wolf that the humans on the farm were essential for growing the crops, which meant they were part of the operation too. If the wolves wanted to keep eating, the people needed to stay safe. The Shadow Wolf considered this for a moment, its expression skeptical. It admitted there was logic in the argument, but said it could not guarantee the safety of every single human. Isagi accepted that with a smile. It was enough. The Shadow Wolf let out a low howl. Within seconds, the rest of the pack emerged from the tree line, dark shapes slipping out of the shadows one after another. They gathered briefly, then scattered into the night, melting into the darkness to take up their positions. One of the workers watching from a distance remarked on how the wolves moved through the shadows so effortlessly, calling it both terrifying and convenient. With the pack deployed, there was still the matter of informing the village. Isagi asked Murthia to explain the arrangement to the rest of Primeia, so nobody panicked when they spotted wolves near the fields. The contributions from the farm would cover the wolves' share, and the village would benefit from the protection. Under the moonlight, Isagi led the Shadow Wolf to the watermelon field. He picked one from the patch and held it up proudly. The wolf eyed it with curiosity. Isagi looked around for a knife to cut it open, but came up empty. Before he could say anything, the Shadow Wolf bared its fangs and sliced the melon cleanly in two with a single bite. Isagi stared, then laughed. The wolf tasted the watermelon and went still. Its eyes widened. The sweetness was unlike anything it had encountered in the wild. Isagi watched with satisfaction as the creature devoured piece after piece. The farm workers gradually drifted over, drawn by the scene. Before long, everyone was sitting together under the night sky, sharing watermelon. The Shadow Wolf raised its head and let out a long howl at the moon, its voice carrying across the open fields. The moment was strangely peaceful. One of the smaller wolves crept forward and received a piece of its own. It bit in and reacted with obvious delight. Isagi explained that the sweetness came from selective cultivation, breeding the fruit specifically to bring out its best qualities. As the night wound down, Isagi turned to the Shadow Wolf and said he wanted to learn its name. The wolf paused and told him it did not have one. Isagi blinked, surprised. He offered to give it one if the wolf would allow it. The creature shrugged the offer off with indifference, saying he could try if he wanted. Isagi fell quiet, thinking hard, turning possibilities over in his head as the moonlight washed over them both. Isagi muttered muttered to himself, running through ideas. The black wolf, a night wolf, jet black fur. He turned the words over, trying to find something that fit. Then it clicked. He looked up at the wolf and suggested the name Kokuru. The wolf tilted its head, rolling the sound around. Kokuru, it repeated slowly. After a pause, it said the name was not too bad. Coming from the shadow wolf, that was as close to approval as anyone was likely to get. They sat together under the moonlight, side by side, each with a slice of watermelon. The smaller wolves lounged nearby, content and full. The scene was quiet, the kind of stillness that only came after something difficult had been resolved. Myrthia and Nea had been close since childhood, and the bond between them showed in how naturally they worked together on the farm. As the days settled into a new routine, Myrthia took on the task of coordinating with Kokuru's pack directly. She met them at the edge of the fields for shift changes, calling out that it was time to swap positions. The wolves responded without hesitation, moving in and out of the shadows around the property. Still, Kokuru had his pride. He made it clear to Myrthia one evening, standing tall and defiant. "We are monsters who thrive in the wild, living as one with nature. To be tamed by humans is something we shall never accept." Myrthia listened without argument. She understood. The arrangement was cooperation, not domestication, and she respected the line. Meanwhile, Isagi threw himself back into his research. He set up an underground experimental farm beneath the workshop, lining the shelves with plants and samples under controlled lighting. The space was designed for precision work, and Isagi studied the layout with satisfaction. He planned to use it for testing crop enhancements in conditions he could monitor closely. He moved through the rows, checking each plant one by one. The okra had unbalanced nutrient ratios that needed correcting. The broccoli was depleting the soil around it too quickly. Every crop presented its own puzzle, and Isagi noted each issue with the same meticulous care he brought to his alchemy. He stopped beneath a trellis of grapevines and looked up. The grapes were growing well. He plucked one and tasted it, nodding with quiet satisfaction at the progress. He moved on to other crops, sampling as he went. Some were too sour. Others had the right yield, but lacked the flavor he was aiming for. Striking the balance between productivity and taste was proving harder than expected. He stood there for a moment, weighing his options, then decided he would keep trying. Myrthia found Isagi in the workshop looking worn out. She told him firmly that if he kept pushing himself like this, his body would break down. Isagi looked at her through tired eyes and admitted she was right. He agreed to take the day off. Myrthia brightened and suggested they go outside. The weather was nice, and she mentioned there was a flower field not far from the farm. Isagi said that sounded good. Before he could even ask about preparations, Myrthia held up a picnic basket with a proud smile. She had already made a lunchbox ahead of time. Isagi stared, caught off guard by how ready she was. He thanked the workers for covering things while they were gone, and mentioned that everyone could join them once the morning tasks were finished. As they headed for the door, a large shape materialized from the shadows behind them. Kokuru appeared without a sound, startling Isagi. He asked how long the wolf had been there. Kokuru offered no explanation, but fell in step with them, apparently planning to tag along. Isagi thanked him for watching over the farm and left it at that. The three of them walked together under a bright sky, the path leading east toward the flower field. When they arrived, the sight stopped them in their tracks. Flowers stretched out in every direction, a vast carpet of color reaching toward the horizon. Myrthia took it all in with wide eyes. One of them remarked that they had no idea such a beautiful place existed so close to the village. They wandered through the field, admiring the different blooms. Myrthia mentioned that picking a reasonable number should be fine. Isagi asked about the names of the flowers, and Myrthia identified them one by one, showing off her knowledge of her homeland's plants. Isagi admitted he did not know much about flowers himself. He stopped beside a yellow ganzania and picked it. Then, on impulse, he channeled a small amount of alchemy into the petals and shifted the pigment. The flower turned a deep, vivid blue. He held it out to Myrthia and told her it was for her. Myrthia froze. Her cheeks flushed red, and she stared at the flower, then back at Isagi, then at the flower again. Isagi noticed her reaction and quickly apologized, saying he had not meant anything strange by it. He had just thought a blue one would look nice. Myrthia shook her head and told him that giving a ganzania flower to someone of the opposite sex carried a special meaning. Isagi's face went blank. He asked what the meaning was, but Myrthia refused to say. She held the flower close with a small, playful smile, leaving him completely in the dark about what he had just done. Isagi tried to take the flower back, suddenly self-conscious about the whole thing. Myrthia pulled it away from him and held it against her chest. She told him with a blissful expression that it was a gift from him and it belonged to her now. There was no getting it back. Before the moment could linger any longer, Kokuru broke in and announced he was hungry. Isagi laughed and suggested they have lunch a little earlier than planned. Murthia opened the picnic basket and laid out the spread. Inside was an assortment of sandwiches, neatly wrapped and arranged with care. Isagi and Kokuru both stared at the variety, impressed. They moved to a shaded spot under a tree and settled in. Murthia offered to cut the sandwiches into portions, making sure Kokuru got a share-sized for him. Everyone dug in. The food was excellent. Thick slices of ham, sweet tomatoes, and crunchy lettuce layered between fresh bread. Murthia mentioned that the vegetables were all homegrown, improved by Isagi's alchemy. She said it with quiet pride, and the quality spoke for itself. Isagi noticed one sandwich with an unusually thick slice of tomato and commented on it. The conversation drifted into playful territory when someone brought up the idea of a watermelon sandwich. Isagi thought it sounded ridiculous at first, but Kokuru jumped in enthusiastically and explained that there actually was one. Murthia had made a watermelon and yogurt cream version. The combination sounded strange, but the curiosity was too strong to resist. They all decided to try it. Murthia set out a tray of the watermelon sandwiches. The filling was a blend of fresh watermelon and creamy yogurt, light and surprisingly elegant. Isagi took a bite, and his eyebrows shot up. The sweetness of the watermelon paired with the tang of the yogurt worked far better than he had expected. He told Murthia it was genuinely good. She smiled, pleased with the reaction. They lounged in the shade, full and content, enjoying the afternoon breeze. Then a voice rang out from across the field. Nia marched toward them, hands on her hips, accusing them of starting lunch without waiting. Behind her trailed the rest of the employees, all of them finished with their morning work and very clearly hungry. They crowded in around the picnic spot, calling out for food and reaching for what was left. The quiet outing quickly turned into a lively group meal, everyone laughing and eating together under the open sky. Nia noticed the group had gathered early and greeted everyone with cheerful surprise. One of the workers admitted with slight embarrassment that they wished they had gotten more done before joining. Someone else spread out a mat on the grass, and another reassured them that it was fine to relax. They all settled under the large tree, soaking in the warm afternoon. Back at the farm, business carried on. Konya from the wonderful trading company arrived on schedule to collect the latest batch of produce. She greeted the team brightly, and Murthia responded formally, already familiar with the routine. Crates of vegetables and fruit were lined up and ready to be loaded. The workers stood at attention, confirming they had checked everything. Murthia oversaw the process quietly, making sure nothing was out of order. Konya noticed the black wolves patrolling near the edge of the property. Her eyes went wide. She asked about the shadow wolves acting as guards, clearly impressed. One of Kokuru's pack stood watch nearby, its dark fur catching the light. Konya could not contain her excitement and edged closer, fascinated by the creature. She was wearing her favorite flower-adorned hat, and one of the younger wolves locked onto it. Before Konya could react, the wolf darted forward and snatched the hat clean off her head. Konya shrieked. "My precious hat!" she cried, spinning around to see the wolf already sprinting away with the prize dangling from its jaws. The chase was on. Konya tore after the wolf, demanding it give the hat back. The wolf was fast, weaving between crates and around the workers, who scrambled to get out of the way. Konya's short legs pumped furiously, but the wolf stayed just out of reach. Someone called out in concern and tried to help cut off the wolf's path. Another person in a hood stepped in to assist, but the wolf dodged them easily. Konya finally managed to corner the wolf near the edge of the field. She threw herself at the creature and latched on, wrapping her small arms around it. She begged over and over for the hat back, her voice rising with each plea. The wolf squirmed, overwhelmed by the relentless shouting. It finally gave in and dropped the hat, bolting away the moment Konya loosened her grip. She clutched the hat to her chest, panting and triumphant, while everyone around her tried not to laugh. After the commotion with Konya settled, Murthia turned the conversation to business. She addressed Konya directly and playfully suggested increasing the trade volume significantly. Konya's eyes went wide, caught off guard by how bold the proposal was. She stammered for a moment before regaining her composure. The issue was clear. The farm had a growing surplus of produce, especially fruit. Stacks of crates filled the storage area, and there was more coming in every day. Managing the excess was becoming a real problem. Someone suggested selling the overflow directly at a nearby town, rather than waiting for the trading company to handle all of it. The idea landed well. Murthia brought up Meline, a town about half a day away by carriage. She pointed out that the market there was busy enough to move large quantities quickly. She was confident the produce would sell like hotcakes once people tasted it. The excitement in her voice made it clear she had been thinking about this for a while. Isagi thanked her for the suggestion and agreed it was worth trying. Nia immediately jumped in, saying she wanted to come along. Myrthia seemed fine with it and started planning. Another worker also expressed interest in joining, mentioning they needed to pick up daily necessities while they were in town. Then, Nia let her real feelings slip. She admitted, a little too honestly, that she wanted a change of scenery and a break from the non-stop work. The words came out before she could stop them, and the group went quiet for a beat before the teasing started. Nia's face turned red as she tried to walk it back, but nobody was buying it. Isagi reminded everyone that this was still a work trip. They would be busy selling produce for most of the time, so there would not be much room for sightseeing. He went over the responsibilities and made sure the logistics were sorted before they left. They set off on the Golem horse, the group riding together with crates of produce in tow. The mood was light and eager. Nea could barely sit still, already looking forward to seeing the town. Myrthia kept things organized from beside Isagi, and the farmland gradually gave way to open road as they headed toward Meline. Isagi had prepared 3 Golem horses for the trip. Nia spotted them and practically squealed, pointing out the number with excitement. She called dibs on one right away. Isagi mentioned that he had already asked the wonderful trading company to gather the materials for them, which impressed Nia even further. Myrthia stood off to the side, her expression unreadable beneath the brim of her hat. Something about the situation seemed to bother her. She glared quietly for a moment before letting out a sigh and telling Isagi it was time to go. Without waiting for a response, she climbed onto her Golem horse and started moving. The sound of hooves clattered across the open plain as the group followed. It was not long before the walls of Meline appeared on the horizon. Isagi leaned forward, unable to hide his excitement. He said they could see the town now. As they drew closer, the scale of the place became clear. Tall stone walls surrounded the city, and a steady stream of people flowed in and out through the main gate. Isagi remarked that Meline was quite the grand city, his voice full of genuine awe. Their group drew attention almost immediately. An old man near the entrance spotted one of them and exclaimed in surprise, recognizing something unusual about the party. They pressed on through the gates and into the city proper. Inside, the streets were lined with colorful stalls and packed with shoppers. The energy of the market hit them the moment they stepped in. Someone asked Isagi if this was his first time visiting. He glanced around and admitted that even though he had passed through before, he had never really had the chance to look around properly. Nea grinned and suggested they explore the town once the work was done. She was practically vibrating with excitement, already planning her route through the market. As they walked, Isagi noticed Myrthia's gaze linger on something at one of the stalls. He asked her about it. She turned red instantly and denied having any interest at all, her voice a little too loud. Isagi smiled, clearly unconvinced. He could tell she liked whatever it was, and made a quiet mental note. They found the market square and surveyed the open space. Isagi announced it was time to lay out the goods and set up their stall. The market was already bustling with vendors and customers in every direction. Before they could unpack, Myrthia reminded him they needed to complete the necessary paperwork first. With the paperwork done, they unloaded the crates and started setting up. Baskets of fruit were arranged across the stall, the colors bright and inviting. Isagi stepped back to look at the spread and figured they were all set, but Nea took one glance and shook her head. She said the display had no appeal. It was functional, sure, but it would not catch anyone's eye. Myrthia protested, flustered, but Nea was already taking charge. She insisted that presentation mattered. If the display was attractive enough, customers would stop, pick something up, and take a closer look. That was the difference between selling out and going home with leftovers. Isagi listened, slightly overwhelmed, but willing to follow her lead. Myrthia looked uncertain, but did not argue. Nia laid out her plan. First, she mentioned the fruit juice. They had brought the blender Isagi had built, and she wanted to offer fresh juice alongside the whole fruit. Someone suggested using cute containers to serve it in, and Nia agreed immediately. She also proposed using woven vine baskets from the village to hold the fruit, giving the display a rustic, handmade charm that would stand out among the other stalls. Then, she unveiled her biggest idea. She took a basket, filled it with a mix of different fruits, and presented it as a set, a variety pack, priced at 3 silver coins. The combination of colors and shapes made the basket look like a gift rather than just groceries. She explained that customers would see it as a ready-made souvenir or present, something they could grab without having to pick out individual items. The group stared at the finished display. Isagi called the idea genius. He said the mixed fruit packs were perfect for souvenirs and predicted they would sell out fast. Nia beamed, clearly proud of herself. Everyone else nodded in agreement, the energy at the stall shifting from uncertain to confident. They were ready for business. The stall opened in the heart of Meline's free market. Murthia stood at the front, the greenery of the town visible behind her through the open street. The plan was simple: sell the surplus fruit, move as much stock as possible, and head home lighter than they came. Nea took position behind the display, offering the mixed fruit sets at 3 silver coins each. It did not take long for the first customer to stop. A woman approached, studied the baskets, and asked about the price. Nea walked her through the selection with a practiced smile, and the sale went through quickly. Murthia bowed slightly, thanking the customer as she left. Isagi noted how fast they had landed their first buyer. Nea shrugged it off with confidence, saying she was used to this kind of work. She turned to the next passerby and called them over with the same energy. An older beastman stopped at the stall and picked up a strawberry, eyeing it with suspicion. He pointed out that strawberries were out of season and questioned their quality. Isagi stepped in with a cheerful grin and told the man that their farm's fruits were delicious all year round. He called it a trade secret and offered the man a free sample to prove it. The beastman bit into the strawberry and went completely still. His eyes widened. He declared it was the sweetest, best strawberry he had ever tasted. The people nearby overheard and crowded closer. A young girl pointed out that the fruits were even better with condensed milk, which set off another wave of interest. Orders started flying in from every direction. Customers shouted over each other, hands reaching toward the stall. Nea raised her voice above the noise, announcing they would serve everyone in order and asking the crowd to form a line. Behind the stall, the team scrambled to keep up. They prepared bread and fruit platters as fast as they could. Isagi remarked that the turnout was far beyond what they had expected. The surplus stock was shrinking fast, which was exactly what they had hoped for. Murthia mentioned they could go shopping once things calmed down, but for now, the stall needed every pair of hands. Nea waved them off. She insisted she could handle the remaining customers on her own and told Isagi and Murthia to go enjoy the town while they had the chance. Murthia protested, but Nea was not having it. She pushed them away from the stall with a playful grin and promised to bring back a gift if they left her to it. Isagi and Murthia exchanged a glance, then gave in. They thanked her and headed off into the market together. Nea waved them off with a huge grin, calling after them that she was really looking forward to whatever gift they brought back. She was practically bouncing on her feet. Isagi and Murthia waved back and disappeared into the charming streets of Meline, banners fluttering overhead. Their first stop was a spice shop. A warmly dressed clerk welcomed them inside, and Isagi noted that the variety of spices was impressive for a town in the Beastkin Kingdom. Murthia asked for 1 kilogram of salt and 1 kilogram of sugar. The clerk quoted the price, and Murthia nodded without complaint. As the clerk weighed the salt, Isagi leaned closer and studied it. He mentioned casually that he had noticed a few impurities mixed in. The clerk looked concerned, but Isagi waved it off and said it was nothing serious. The clerk apologized, explaining that no matter how careful they were, some contamination was unavoidable with their current methods. Isagi offered to purify the salt himself. The clerk blinked, confused. Isagi placed his hand over the salt and channeled his alchemy. Light rippled across the surface as impurities separated and dissolved. When he was finished, the clerk stared at the result in disbelief. The salt was unbelievably pure, cleaner than anything they had ever handled. The other customers in the shop turned to look, equally stunned. Isagi explained that he was an alchemist and offered to purify the rest of the shop's stock as well. The clerk accepted without hesitation, overwhelmed with gratitude. Isagi worked through the remaining inventory, purifying both salt and sugar in batches. When he was done, the clerk thanked him profusely and insisted the goods be provided free of charge. Isagi and Murthia walked out with 30 kilograms of salt and sugar between them, all of it at no cost. Murthia remarked on how unexpectedly well that had gone. Isagi laughed and said the haul would be more than enough for the farm. Murthia smiled, clearly pleased, and mentioned there was still plenty of work waiting back home, but that today had been a welcome change. As they strolled further, Murthia spotted another shop and asked if they could take a look inside. Isagi agreed, saying that exploring was part of the fun. The interior was filled with elaborate decorations and accessories crafted from magical ore. Isagi studied the pieces with fascination, noting how the regional style differed from what he had seen in the Empire. The craftsmanship used minerals in creative ways he had not considered before. He glanced over at Murthia and caught her staring at a particular piece. Her expression was soft, almost wistful, her eyes tracing the details of what looked like a delicate hair ornament. Isagi pointed it out and suggested it would suit her. Murthia's face went red. She stammered that it was too extravagant and that something like that was not meant for someone like her, but her eyes kept drifting back to it, and Isagi noticed. Murthia asked if they should keep going, and Isagi agreed. He lingered for a moment at the display, studying the shape and construction of the ornaments. He muttered to himself that now he understood how they were made. Something was clearly forming in his mind, but he kept it to himself. They headed back toward the stall. As they rounded the corner, someone called out urgently. Isagi looked up and saw Nea slumped across the counter, barely holding herself up. She let out a weak groan, completely drained. Isagi and Murthia rushed over. Nea explained that a sudden rush of customers had hit all at once, and she had been running the stall non-stop by herself. Every last piece of fruit was gone. Isagi thanked her with genuine enthusiasm, telling her she had done an incredible job. Murthia echoed the praise. Nea accepted their words with a tired but satisfied expression, too exhausted to celebrate properly. Then, Nea perked up just enough to ask the question she had been waiting for. She looked at them expectantly and asked where her gift was. Murthia smiled and told her not to worry. She had already bought the wine Nea liked. Nea's face lit up with relief and gratitude. Isagi, on the other hand, went stiff. He clearly had not bought anything for her. He scrambled and offered up high-quality salt as a gift instead. Nea stared at him. The silence said everything. Murthia gave him a look, and Isagi's face burned with embarrassment. Salt was many things, but a thoughtful present it was not. They packed up and headed home. On the way back, Isagi told Murthia not to worry about dinner that evening. She seemed curious, but did not press. Later, at the house, Isagi called Murthia over to the doorway. He told her the timing was perfect and asked her to come closer. He held out a small object. It was a hair accessory, crafted by his own hand from magic ore and sapphire. The design was delicate and elegant, catching the light as Murthia stared at it. Her breath caught. She said it was much more beautiful than anything she had seen at the shop in Meline. Isagi's cheeks reddened as he explained that he had wanted to give it to her as a way of saying thanks for everything she did. Murthia held the ornament gently, her eyes glistening. She whispered a soft acceptance, her voice barely above a breath. For a long, quiet moment, neither of them moved. The gratitude between them needed no more words. Murthia looked down at the ornament in her hands and said she did not deserve such kindness, but thanked him from the bottom of her heart. She hesitated, then asked if she could try it on. Isagi nodded. She turned away for a moment, her fingers trembling slightly as she fixed it into her hair. When she turned back, she asked how it looked. Her cheeks were flushed. Her expression caught somewhere between excitement and shyness. Isagi stared. He told her it really suited her, that it went perfectly with her black hair and made her look even more beautiful. The word hung in the air between them. Murthia's composure broke. Beautiful, she repeated softly, the weight of the compliment hitting her all at once. Under the quiet night sky, she blushed deeper and thanked him again, her voice barely above a whisper. The moment was still and warm, the kind that neither of them would forget easily. Far away in the Remulus Empire, things were falling apart. At Remulus Castle, First Prince Weiss Drevenshire, Remulus sat in a meeting room, visibly furious. An advisor had just presented a new proposal for the alchemy division. Weiss slammed it down and declared it was nothing compared to Isagi's work. He rejected it outright, his tone sharp enough to silence the room. The advisor backed away, apologetic but helpless. Weiss demanded more concrete solutions. His frustration boiled over as he struck the table, sending a cup of water crashing to the floor. He ordered his subordinates to delay the next appointment and focus on the urgent matters in front of them. The alchemy division had been struggling ever since Isagi left. Repair work that had once been handled by Isagi alone was now piling up with no one capable of taking over. Weiss laid out the scale of the backlog, his disappointment cutting through every word. Someone suggested calling Isagi back. Gallius, who had been listening from the side, reacted with visible unease. The suggestion clearly struck a nerve. The conversation ended with apologies and a pressing sense that the Empire's problems were only getting worse. Meanwhile, back at the farm in Primeia, a different kind of chaos was unfolding. Nola came riding in on horseback at full speed. Inside the house, Nea was scrambling. She explained to the others that merchants had been arriving one after another to inquire about buying produce, and with Murthia away, there was no one to handle the negotiations properly. The urgency on her face made it clear they needed a solution fast. Word about the farm had spread far beyond Primeia, and merchants were arriving in droves. The village was busier than anyone had expected. When Murthia returned, she announced herself and dove straight into the chaos, cutting into the ongoing negotiations without missing a beat. Someone remarked in disbelief at how quickly she had gotten there. Murthia told them to leave the merchants to her and took charge immediately, steering the conversations with the kind of authority that put everyone at ease. While Murthia handled the negotiations, the rest of the team discussed the growing growing workload. The farm was attracting more attention than they could manage out of the house alone. Something had to change. Nola stepped forward with a suggestion. She mentioned that she had experience helping with bookkeeping at her mother's store and proposed setting up a dedicated sales area on the property. The idea clicked right away. Without a proper space for visitors, merchants had nowhere to go and customers had no clear direction. Nola's plan would solve both problems at once. Someone thanked her and offered to pass the proposal along to Murthia as soon as the negotiations wrapped up. The conversation expanded from there. Someone suggested the sales area could also include a break room for staff, giving the workers a place to rest between shifts. Nola volunteered to handle reception and administrative duties herself, pointing out that paperwork was one of her strongest skills. The group responded with encouragement, and the plan started to take shape. Later, Isagi and Murthia sat down to review what had come out of the merchant meetings. Nothing major had developed on the business side, but the merchants had brought troubling news. Harvest yields were dropping across multiple regions, and crop failures were spreading. The economic impact could be severe if the trend continued. Both of them understood the urgency. There was a silver lining, though. The farm's improved crop varieties had shielded Primeia from the worst of the failures. That protection would not go unnoticed, and demand for their produce was only going to increase. The need for a proper sales building became even more pressing. Isagi mentioned he had already been thinking about the design and suggested using alchemy to build it quickly. The others reacted with surprise, but by now they knew better than to doubt what Isagi could put together when he set his mind to it. Isagi laid out the plans with enthusiasm. He described the features he had in mind: a storage area for produce, a break room for the workers, and a proper front counter for handling customers. Murthia listened carefully, taking it all in. Nia leaned in with a thoughtful expression, already imagining how the space would work. With the design settled, Isagi wasted no time. He gathered the group outside, held up the blueprints, and got to work. Alchemical energy surged from his hands, and the construction began. Walls rose from the ground, beams locked into place, and the structure took shape at a speed that left everyone around him stunned. The workers in the foreground stared with their mouths open. Nola threw her hands in the air, caught up in the excitement of watching an entire building appear in front of her eyes. When the dust cleared, a brand new building stood on the farm property. The group tilted their heads back to take in the full scale of it. Isagi stepped back, satisfied. Murthia asked if they could go inside and see the rest. The interior was spacious, with warm wooden walls and plenty of natural light. Someone commented on how cozy it felt, and suggested making part of it a resting area for visitors. They moved through the rooms, noting the ample shelving along the walls. There was more than enough space for storing and displaying produce. Everyone agreed it was exactly what they needed. Nea found a spot near the back, stretched out, and declared she was not leaving. Someone laughed and pointed out the front counter, impressed by how professional it looked. Isagi explained his vision for the space, a place modeled after a fresh produce market, where customers could browse, pick what they wanted, and interact with the staff directly. He wanted it to feel community-focused, not just transactional. Nea nodded in amazement, saying their plans kept getting bigger than she ever imagined. The mood was bright and forward-looking. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Outside, the sound of wheels on dirt drew everyone's attention. An ominous-looking carriage rolled toward the farm, flanked by an escort. The workers near the entrance tensed. Someone recognized the carriage and muttered that it belonged to someone important. A boot stepped down from the carriage door, and the group fell silent, waiting to see who had arrived. The carriage doors opened fully, and two figures stepped out. The first was a towering beastman with a long beard and a fur-trimmed cloak, his presence immediately commanding. Beside him was a small girl with green hair and beast ears, staying close at his side. Behind them, Konya trailed with a nervous smile. One of the workers asked who they were, staring at the approaching figures with wide eyes. Isagi froze. His senses had already picked up on something before anyone else could see it. The amount of mana radiating from the large beastman was staggering, far beyond anything he had encountered before. A swirling energy seemed to pulse around the man with every step. Isagi turned to Murthia and told her quietly that the person next to Konya was carrying an extraordinary amount of power. Murthia's eyes locked onto the figure, and her expression shifted instantly. As the group drew closer, Murthia pulled Isagi aside. Her voice was low and urgent. She explained that among the many kinds of beastkin, only members of the royal family carried that particular aura. Isagi's eyes went wide. He stammered, struggling to process what she was telling him. The towering beastman stopped in front of Isagi and looked down at him with a calm, composed expression. He asked if Isagi was the one managing this large farm. Isagi straightened up and confirmed that he was. The man studied him for a moment, then spoke with a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Leonel, the 62nd Beast King." The words landed like a thunderclap. Isagi stood rooted to the spot. Around them, the workers and staff exchanged frantic glances, the reality of the situation crashing over everyone at once. Isagi's mind raced with a single thought. Why would the Beast King himself come all the way to this village? The group gathered in front of the farmhouse as Leonel surveyed the property. The scale of the operation clearly impressed him. He remarked that what had started as a small plot had seemingly grown into something as large as a village. Isagi stood before him formally, and Leonel gestured for him to rise, making it clear there was no need for excessive ceremony. Kevin, the Prime Minister of the Beastman Kingdom, spoke next. He mentioned that rumors about the farm had been spreading far and wide, drawing attention from all corners of the kingdom. He expressed personal interest and requested a tour of the property. Isagi agreed without hesitation. Konya, however, declined to join the tour. She said she would rather spend her time at the new sales area, already eyeing it with professional interest. Isagi nodded and turned his attention back to the guests. He brought out the Golem horses for transportation. Leonel's eyes locked onto the black Golem horse immediately. Isagi explained how to operate them, and the Beast King listened with genuine fascination. He asked if he could ride one himself. Isagi handed over the reins, and Leonel mounted up. The Beast King took to it almost instantly. He rode with a confidence that surprised everyone watching, his massive frame somehow looking natural on the mechanical steed. He expressed open admiration for the creation and said he wanted one for himself. Kevin watched from the side, equally intrigued. The enthusiasm was contagious, and the mood around the group lightened considerably. Isagi led them through the farm, on horseback. As they entered the narrower paths between the crop rows, he asked them to slow down for safety. The fields were packed tight, and one wrong step could damage the plants. Leonel struggled slightly with the slower pace, his energy clearly suited to something faster, but he respected the request. They arrived at the vegetable fields. Leonel looked out over the soil and noted that the ground here had originally been barren. He asked how anything could grow in land like this. Isagi explained that he had used alchemy to transform the soil, enriching it with nutrients and adjusting its composition to support crops. Leonel and Kevin exchanged a glance of genuine amazement. The barren wasteland they had heard about was now a thriving farm, and alchemy was the reason it existed at all. Leonel turned to Isagi with a look of admiration and told him he was truly exceptional. Isagi blushed, caught off guard by the directness of the compliment. He stammered, unsure how to respond to praise from the Beast King himself. They continued through the fields. Leonel noticed tomatoes growing among the crops and pointed them out, surprised to see them out of season. Isagi encouraged him to try one. Leonel picked a tomato, bit into it, and stopped mid-chew. His eyes widened. He declared it the best tomato he had ever tasted, praising the sweetness and the firm texture. Kevin tried one as well and reacted the same way. Then the mood changed. The guards in Leonel's escort suddenly went tense. A low rumble echoed from the direction of the village, and something large was moving toward them through the fields. One of the guards stepped in front of Leonel and warned him to get back. The villagers nearby looked uneasy, questioning why a magical beast was approaching. The guards drew their weapons and formed a defensive line. Isagi called out to them and urged them to hold. He explained quickly that the creatures were magical beasts who protected the farm. They were allies, not threats. Leonel raised a hand and commanded his squad to lower their weapons unless they were provoked first. The guards hesitated, but obeyed. Kokuru stepped into view. The Shadow Wolf's dark form materialized at the edge of the clearing, his glowing eyes fixed on Leonel. The Beast King stared back, neither flinching. The air between them crackled with tension. Kokuru studied Leonel for a long moment, then let out a low, rumbling voice. "How naive," he said, a sly edge to his words. Before anyone could react, Kokuru vanished. His body dissolved into shadow, disappearing completely. The guards spun around, weapons half raised, searching for where he had gone. Someone muttered in disbelief, asking if the wolf could truly hide inside shadows. Then Kokuru burst forward from the darkness, lunging at Leonel with raw aggression. He warned the Beast King to face him with everything he had. Leonel did not retreat. The two locked eyes, the intensity of the stare down making it clear that neither of them intended to back down. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began. Leonel stood over Kokuru, laughing heartily. He called out to the wolf by name, his tone more amused than hostile. Kokuru lay on the ground, completely spent. Isagi rushed over and asked if he was all right. Kokuru grumbled in response, brushing off the concern as though it meant nothing to him. Isagi looked between the two and admitted that Leonel truly deserved the title of strongest beastkin. The Beast King's combat ability was on another level entirely. Leonel, still in good spirits, turned his attention to Kokuru and pointed out that the wolf relied too heavily on his shadow movement. He suggested Kokuru go back to the base basics and relearn how to fight without it. The advice was delivered with a grin, but there was real weight behind the words. Isagi reflected that most high-rank monsters had the same problem. They leaned on one overwhelming strength and never developed anything else. Kokuru said nothing, but the defeat had clearly left an impression. Even so, Isagi felt more confident about the farm's security now. Between Kokuru's pack and the golems, the defenses were solid. The mood lightened. Leonel praised the farm openly, singling out the fruits as truly something special. Isagi offered to pack some as a gift for him to take back. Leonel hesitated, not wanting to impose, but his expression gave away how much the gesture meant to him. Then the conversation turned serious. Leonel's demeanor shifted. He spoke about his family and the weight of his responsibilities. Despite holding the title of Beast King, his concerns were deeply human. Kevin stepped forward and suggested it was time to discuss the real reason for the visit. Leonel explained that poor harvests had been spreading across the entire Beastkin kingdom. Crop failures were hitting region after region, and the food supply was shrinking fast. Isagi's jaw dropped. He had known about scattered problems, but the scale of the crisis was far worse than he had imagined. Leonel looked Isagi in the eye. "Will you sell your crops to us?" he asked, the desperation barely hidden behind his composure. Isagi and Myrthia both stared, wide-eyed. Kevin urged Leonel to maintain his royal dignity, but the Beast King would not hear it. His frustration broke through. He said he did not care about protocols or appearances. His people were starving, and nothing else mattered. He bowed his head and pleaded for their help. Isagi stood still, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He thought about the rulers he had served in the Remulus Empire, men who used their power for selfish gains and never once looked down at the people beneath them. Leonel was nothing like them. A king willing to throw away his pride for the sake of his subjects was something Isagi had never encountered before. He made his decision. He told Leonel that they would offer their full support. Myrthia nodded beside him, her expression set with the same resolve. Whatever it took to help the kingdom through this crisis, they were ready. Isagi stood with his bag over his shoulder, ready to move. Leonel thanked him warmly for agreeing to help, his expression full of genuine gratitude. Myrthia confirmed she was prepared to go as well. Nearby, Kevin requested a full report on the situation and raised a hand with a questioning look, wanting to make sure everything was in order before they proceeded. Leonel sat down with Isagi for a longer conversation. The Beast King raised practical concerns about the farm's profitability and the risks of selling crops on such a large scale. Isagi listened carefully, his eyes widening as he realized there were factors he had not fully considered. He acknowledged the need to prepare for things that could go wrong. Isagi shifted the discussion toward a plan he had been forming. He explained his idea to distribute improved crop varieties across the kingdom, not just sell the harvest from Primeia. He pulled out a village map and laid out the potential for development in other regions. If the right seeds reached the right places, entire communities could start growing food on their own. A memory surfaced as he spoke. He recalled sitting in a small wooden house as a child, the feeling of hunger still sharp in his mind. That experience had never left him. It was the reason he cared so deeply about making sure no one else had to go through the same thing. His resolve hardened. He told them he wanted to help as many people as possible. Kevin handed him a rolled scroll containing detailed information about the kingdom's agricultural situation. Isagi accepted it with appreciation. Kevin also presented a magical vial, hinting at alchemical applications that could prove useful for what lay ahead. Isagi unrolled a detailed map from the scroll and studied it closely. He praised the scope of the data and the thoroughness of the agricultural records. He turned to Kevin and thanked him directly, recognizing how valuable the information would be for their mission. Without wasting any more time, Isagi mounted his golem horse and told them he needed to get to his workshop for some quick modifications. Kevin watched him ride off with a look of surprise at the urgency. At the workshop, Isagi pulled out a batch of potatoes. He thought back to when they had first been planted in Primeia and considered what adjustments would be needed for different soil types across the kingdom. He reviewed the growth data, marking where modifications were required and mapping out the changes in his head. Then it clicked. His face lit up as years of accumulated knowledge and experience converged. Alchemical energy swirled around his hands, and the array beneath him glowed. Everything he had learned, every failure and success, was feeding into this moment. He was ready to transform the crops for a much larger purpose. Myrthia came to the workshop and told Isagi that His Majesty was preparing to leave soon. She looked excited, but was caught off guard when Isagi swung the door open before she could finish. Her eyes went wide, startled by his sudden energy. Inside, Isagi stood over a potted plant, studying it with a careful eye. He said the task was done, though something about the result still left him slightly unsure. He looked at the plant, turning it in his hands, examining every detail before committing to his assessment. Murthia watched him and commented on how confident he seemed, reading his expression as a sign that he had pulled it off. They stepped outside together. A man handed Isagi the pot, and he was immediately surprised to find a crowd had gathered. Riders and a group were approaching in the distance, signaling Leonel's departure preparations. Isagi presented the modified potato to Leonel. He explained that it had been designed specifically to grow easily in the Beastkin Kingdom's soil. The crop was hardy, filling, and required minimal care to cultivate. Leonel's face brightened at the news. However, Isagi added a serious warning. The potato was meant strictly for relief aid. It grew fast, but would exhaust the soil's nutrients quickly if planted repeatedly. His tone turned firm. He told Leonel that unless the potato was handled with care, it could do more harm than good. If the soil was drained, the land would become unusable. He recommended imposing a ban on continued planting once the crisis passed and ensuring proper disposal of any remaining stock. Leonel listened carefully and agreed to follow those conditions. Leonel stepped forward and faced Isagi with the full weight of his authority. "I will repay this debt under the Beast King's name," he declared. The words carried the gravity of an oath. Murthia and Isagi both stiffened, caught off guard by the formality. Murthia lowered her head modestly and said that what they had done was nothing more than basic duty as citizens of the kingdom. Before leaving, Leonel raised one more point. He warned Isagi that the farm's success had not gone unnoticed. The land around Primeia, once barren and worthless, was now incredibly fertile and productive. That kind of value attracted attention, and not all of it would be friendly. Foreign powers might take an interest. A cart rolled into view as Leonel spoke, and the conversation ended with assurances about regional safety. After the royal party departed, Isagi let out a long breath. He admitted to Murthia that dealing with someone of that rank left him feeling wound up. Murthia was quiet for a moment, her thoughts clearly running deeper than the immediate exchange. She seemed to be weighing the broader implications of what Leonel had said about outside threats. After a pause, she offered Isagi a small, reassuring look, and the tension between them eased. With Leonel gone and the farm quiet again, Isagi found himself reflecting. He thought about everything that had happened since leaving the Remulus Empire, being stripped of his position as royal alchemist, arriving in Primeia with nothing, and slowly building a life from the ground up. Through all of it, Murthia had been there. He smiled and told her how grateful he was for her constant support. She had never wavered, not once. Murthia held a cup in her hands and told him not to blame himself for any of it. She said she was happy with how things had turned out. Her words were simple, but the comfort they carried was real. Isagi went quiet for a moment. Something had been nagging at him. He realized that despite working alongside Murthia for so long, he had understood so little about what she was feeling. He had been so focused on alchemy and the farm that he had missed things right in front of him. The thought weighed on him. Murthia, unaware of his inner struggle, cheerfully announced she would go make some tea. Before she could leave, Isagi stopped her. He told her he had something to show her and asked her to follow him to the workshop basement. Murthia looked surprised, but agreed, curiosity pulling her along. They descended the stairs together. What waited for her at the bottom took her breath away. A tree heavy with ripe grapes stood in the center of the room, its vines stretching wide under the soft glow of the lights. Murthia's face flushed. Isagi stood beside her and told her the grapes were for her, a token of his gratitude for everything she had done. Murthia stared at the tree, overwhelmed. She said she could not believe the effort he had put into growing them, and her voice cracked slightly as she thanked him. Isagi admitted the grapes were still difficult to grow in large quantities, but the quality had turned out well. He invited her to try some. Murthia reached for a grape and put it in her mouth. She chewed slowly, and then she went still. Isagi watched her face, anxious. He asked how it tasted. Tears welled up in her eyes. She told him they were delicious, the best she had ever had. She was crying and smiling at the same time, unable to hold back the wave of emotion that hit her. Isagi beamed. Hearing those words was all the validation he needed. Murthia wiped her eyes and said that life had changed so much since Isagi came to the village. She looked at him and at the farm beyond the walls, thinking of the villagers, the workers, the fields that had once been empty dirt. She insisted the improvements were not just because of her. Everyone had played a part. Later that night, they stood outside under the stars. Isagi turned to her and said he wanted to rely on her more going forward. He asked if she would continue to support him, wherever the road might lead. Myrthia met his gaze without hesitation. "I will stay by your side, no matter where the journey takes us," she said, her voice steady and full of conviction. The night sky stretched wide above them, and the farmland lay still and peaceful below. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Far from Primeia, in the halls of the Remulus Empire, the mood was grim. A meeting was underway. The leader addressed the room and confirmed that the food production policy had been rejected in favor of increased military spending. The decision had drawn heavy criticism, but he made it clear it was his call and his alone. The priority now was resolving the fallout as quickly as possible. The problem was bigger than just the Empire. A poor harvest was spreading across the entire world. The Beastkin Kingdom had been hit hard, and reports were coming in from every direction. The attendees exchanged troubled glances, the scale of the crisis dawning on them. One of them voiced what everyone was thinking. They needed a solution, and they needed it now. An advisor apologized for the state of affairs, though the apology did little to ease the tension. Then, a piece of intelligence reached the table. One region had apparently escaped the harvest failures entirely. The room went quiet. Someone speculated that this anomaly was connected to the work of a certain alchemist, a man capable of cultivating crops at a rate no one else could match, completely unaffected by the agricultural collapse sweeping the continent. The name did not need to be spoken. Everyone in the room knew who they were talking about. An elder recalled Primeia village and noted how fortunate its situation was. Another commented that the alchemist's methods were nothing short of remarkable. The implications were clear. While the rest of the world starved, one small village in the Beastkin Kingdom was thriving because of Isagi. The discussion shifted. Figures gathered around a map, tracing borders and supply routes. There was talk of positive feedback from the royal court and plans moving forward, but underneath the strategy, something darker was taking shape. The tone in the room changed. One voice rose above the rest, cold and decisive. "Whatever we lack, we'll simply take it from someone else." The words settled over the room like a shadow. No one objected. The Remulus Empire had made its choice, while Isagi and Myrthia stood under a peaceful night sky in Primeia, promising to face the future together. The Empire was already sharpening its gaze toward them. The storm had not arrived yet, but it was coming.